It was a truly great battle in its scale. The monster wriggled, destroying everything around it. Be that as it may, it tried to touch the brave warrior in front of it. At some point, the brave warrior lost control of the battle. He missed an important moment, and with his paw the monster struck. He was thrown up with the crunch of his own bones. Blood poured from his mouth, and his thoughts constantly revolved around the humiliating defeat. At some point the fighting died down. The brave warrior heard footsteps approaching him. Raising his head, he recognized those who had arrived. The warrior asked them for help, but in response he received only lengthy dialogues. Moreover, the ring was deliberately removed from the warrior's finger. The warrior was struck by despair. He did not understand what was happening right now. But the next action was that the two people in front of the warrior began to kiss. For the first time, the brave man's feelings were deeply hurt. All his actions demonstrated that the warrior was now a nobody. Under the sight of hot kisses, the brave man's body began to weaken. He was incredibly upset that he had once valued these people, receiving only betrayal in response. And then, some third forces intervened in the situation. Darkness enveloped the brave man, but not for long, as the haze was dispelled by the ringing of the alarm clock. Out of anger, my hand slammed on the alarm clock to shut it off. The hero opened his eyes, completely unable to understand where he ended up. After examining himself, he discovered with horror that he had lost all his accessories. Then I was completely taken aback when I found out the date and time of my stay. It just so happened that Vance was reborn about 10 years before all the important events in his life began. Soon he began to wonder why, and for what reason, he had been reborn. After a couple of minutes, he was overcome with anger at the thought of betrayal. Vance could not forgive the fact that he had been betrayed by the woman he loved with all his heart. Moreover, she cheated on him with the hero's best friend. These thoughts tormented Vance's soul greatly. Having caught his breath, he swore to take revenge. And to do this, the first thing Vance did was call one person. The conversation between them was a mixture of flirting and mutual insults. Osoba was not averse to chatting, especially since she had some information. Vance recalled that at a similar moment, many years ago, he had been told about his girlfriend Hagen's betrayal. Now knowing the whole truth, unusually for himself, Vance even asked the person for forgiveness for all his previous antics. But she didn't believe in the hero's sincerity, considering the call an absurd joke. Afterwards, she nevertheless spoke again about Hagen's betrayal. She was shocked at how easily the hero took this news. For the first time, Vance's coolness and aloofness frightened her. This feeling quickly passed when the hero started talking about a game that was gaining momentum. Vance shared an idea to succeed in that. Now Vance was the only one who knew about the sinister secret of this game. She was destined to merge with the real world and change forever. Unexpectedly, the person supported Vance in his professional choice. The hero was serious and even planned out his schedule. After listening to him and praising him, I was especially about to switch off. Vance quickly stopped the girl, a little embarrassed when he started talking about financial support. In response to this, the person began to shout about Vance's irresponsibility, after which the call naturally ended. The hero could only sigh and regret that he had not been reborn earlier. Less than a minute later, Vance received a notice from the bank. Immediately after this, a threatening message followed. The unbalanced person still lent the hero money. A lot of time has passed since then. Luckily, they didn't have time to remove one of Vance's rings before he died. At the right time, Vance aimed the ring at his eye. An analyzing beam erupted from there. The previous reality dissolved, and the hero found himself in the game's loading screen. Soon Vance found himself in the hub, among many other players. Slowly descending, the figure bestowed its radiance upon them. Vance knew this was a mandatory NPC to meet. Other players, especially male ones, tried to show the figure attention. Vance sighed in disappointment, as Lady Nuva did not appreciate such things. Suddenly enraged, Nuva summoned a storm, throwing some of the players in different directions. The other players ran away in horror, and only Vance approached her with a bow. Nuva liked the hero's courage and respect. As Nuva approached him, she asked Vance an important question. The hero gave an answer, wanting to receive a blessing. Nuva extended her hand in agreement. The hero grinned. He knew that he was about to receive his first talent. A couple of moments later, to the music, a column of light descended upon the hero. But the unexpected happened. The talent given to Vance completely disrupted the acquisition of other talents. Thus, when developing himself, the hero could easily acquire both useful and negative traits. In any case, the goddess's gift was made. The next step for Vance was to create an avatar. At some point, settling on an appearance that satisfied the hero with its characteristics. At least now, Vance didn't make the mistakes of the past. He strove to have maximum charisma in order to easily influence NPCs. This time, Vance set out to make up for lost time. Manhwa then opened the scroll. According to him, the hero had to choose the point of his appearance. Vance thought about it, because the available locations directly influenced the player class. Afterwards, the hero opened his stats, pondering his choice. The initial characteristics were not bad, and Vance even thought about rapid development. Moreover, this time, he was acting purely for himself. Not wanting to be dependent on anyone, Vance clicked on the location. The choice was made and the scroll was engulfed in flames. Vance waited humbly, thinking of himself as now a strong-willed individual. The hero even imagined how high he would be able to reach. From the outside, seeing himself as an unrivaled master of the sword. A few seconds later, Vance was transported to the previously selected location. It was one of many starting villages for newcomers. Vance's vision had barely cleared when he found himself in a crowd. A huge crowd of other players wandered around in all directions, not knowing where to start. Some of them were searching in vain for quests, while others were simply chatting. Suddenly, a crowd of players surrounded the old NPC. Only Vance didn't pay attention to him, knowing that the noticeable NPCs didn't have quests. The hero was in no hurry, because unlike the others, he knew the game perfectly. Suddenly, someone asked Vance not to leave. Intrigued, the hero stopped and looked back. It was Cyan, an NPC and the owner of the local studio. Then she hugged the hero, complaining about her loneliness. Vance's eyes widened, feeling the power of charisma for the first time. In addition to Kian's great soul, the hero was also offered a quest. The hero was at a loss, because the temptation was incredibly great. After thinking for a second or two, Vance came to the conclusion that he couldn't refuse. But the hero decided to take on the quest itself a little later. Moreover, the road led the hero to a completely different place. The players he encountered tried to dissuade Vance from going any further, warning him about the silent blacksmith. Having thanked them, the hero continued on his way and entered the forge. Standing to the side, Vance took a closer look at the blacksmith. He knew a secret about it. To get him to talk, Vance used a trick and added some fire to the forge. The blacksmith seemed to come to life, because he just didn't have enough temperature for forging. After which, the clanking of iron began to come from the forge. The blacksmith began his hot and painstaking work there. After a couple of minutes, the blacksmith dipped the workpiece into water. Afterwards, rejoicing that the sword had finally come out, he then went on to thank Vance for his help. As a token of gratitude, offering the hero a choice of weapons. Vance grinned, because no one knew about this secret. Afterwards, he walked briskly to the gun rack. Even though the weapon was only given out for one day, it provided good buffs. Seeing the sword in Vance's hands, the blacksmith approved of his choice. Moreover, the blacksmith also gave the hero a quest. Using the game's tricks, Vance took this quest right away. He subsequently left the forge, being the first newcomer to acquire a weapon. One by one, they turned to Vance, just to learn the secret of obtaining the weapon. The hero lied that the blacksmith only needed to sing. Immediately, a whole crowd of players rushed to the forge. Later, the blacksmith was in a bad mood. The players wondered why the blacksmith suddenly started behaving like this. Eventually, they were driven away. Vance's joke was a success, but along with it, he also acquired some ill-wishers. Be that as it may, now he was far away from them. He walked confidently through the bamboo forest. The monsters there waited for the right moment and rushed at the hero. However, the monster was not in a winning position. Vance dodged and immediately counterattacked. A series of quick blows and the green snake was killed. The hero didn't receive a single point of damage, but he managed to gain experience. In addition, the monster dropped loot that Vance could later sell. And yet the hero was surprised, because previously, items did not fall out so easily. Seeing no logic in what had happened, Vance decided that a chance talent was to blame. Since the quest needed to be completed, he continued searching for monsters. Soon, the carcasses of slain monsters were scattered throughout the forest. The hero's current campaign has come to an end. Vance was tired not only from the battle, but also from the loot, the amount of which reached the bag on his back. Moving with difficulty, he made his way back to the village. First of all, deliver what is needed to the blacksmith. Vance presented him with the snake's fangs. Holding the pouch in his hands, the blacksmith appreciated Vance's efforts. Afterwards, handing the hero a letter. Upon opening it, Vance discovered an invitation to the Sword Guild. At the same time, the hero learned that he was the first owner of the letter. Vance was pleased with the outcome, as there were no competitors in sight. But before moving on, Vance decided to sell his loot. For the sake of something like this, he even organized an entire auction. The players named their prices until someone shouted out a large sum. A girl appeared, her chest heaving as she walked. Approaching Vance, she was ready to pay immediately. The hero grinned because he liked the price. But before he could give his consent, someone raised the price even higher. The new face was Hao, the guild leader, But in reality, Hao was not so much interested in the purchase as in Vance himself, as an unusual player. The players looked at each other, seeing the guild leader for the first time. Vance greeted him, remembering the cost of his bad relationship with this man. Hao hoped that he and Vance could find common ground. The hero put on a show by trying to butter up. It is expected that after something like this, Hao tried to recruit the hero into his guild. Their conversation was interrupted when the owner of the ample bust named an even higher sum. Hao easily surpassed the figure there, but the girl did not stop. Standing opposite each other, they endlessly increased the amount they were willing to part with. The hero liked the girl, and especially her stubborn character. At some point, she even offered $500,000 for the onion. Hao began to get angry, warning the girl not to get carried away. The other players could only enjoy this spectacle. Moreover, the owner of a lush bust was not at all afraid of Hao. Having no more power to raise the price, Hao gave in. He was about to leave when Vance called out to him. The hero offered a deal where, in addition to money, he also wanted to join the Hao Guild. Even though the hero showed greed, he managed to intrigue Hao, ultimately agreeing to Vance's terms. The hero was happy, knowing that he had finally managed to make a good impression on Hao. Hao himself laughed at the girl's attempts to beat him. The hero, however, remained the only winner. Moreover, the bow that Hao bought was by no means a good purchase. The crowd gradually began to disperse, but only the busty girl among them stopped. Suddenly, she pointed an accusing finger at Vance. She couldn't believe that the hero had managed to so basely renounce his initial words. Later, the action of the story moved to the wild forest. Together with her friends, the busty girl was going to hunt wild boars. She gave out instructions, preparing for an effective hunt. But the plan was interrupted when Vance appeared. The busty woman never expected to meet the deceiver again. Despite the aggression directed at him, the hero wanted to chat. Approaching him, the busty one wanted to know the truth of the hero's visit. For some reason, she felt a certain responsibility for Vance. She was about to set him on the right path, as the hero offered information at a high price. The busty one didn't really trust the hero, because he could always sell information to Hao. The hero waved it off, calling Hao unworthy. The busty one was hesitant, but nevertheless, she was not going to miss the opportunity to surpass the Hao Guild. Besides, Vance was extremely persistent. After a couple of seconds of thought, the busty one agreed. Vance was delighted with the monetary haul, although he knew that after a couple of years, everything would be worthless. As soon as the money had been transferred to the hero's account, he told him about the forge. The busty one pulled out her sword, thinking that Vance had decided to fool her. The hero stood his ground and suggested checking everything together. If successful, he only asked that everything be kept secret. Afterwards, directly hinting at the final reward from the blacksmith. Taking it out, Vance showed an invitation to the guild. Having said enough, the hero was about to leave. Finally, he called the busty one a cutie. Of course, she was embarrassed. But this feeling quickly passed, because at that moment the other girls were being chased by a boar. Means immediately drew attention to the screams and stomping. But this was no ordinary boar, but a real boss. Minz urged everyone to run, because he didn't have enough strength to fight the boss. At this moment, Vance revealed himself again. He boldly rushed forward, wanting to deal with the boss alone. But for everything to go well, he only asked for a sword for himself. Minz willingly handed over the weapon to the hero. Drawing his sword from its sheath, the hero was ready for battle. The other girls laughed, thinking that Vance was just showing off in front of Minz. Feeling shy, Minz tried to put an end to such conversations. Meanwhile, the hero finally reached the boss. Vance swung his sword, annoyed that he had met the boss after he had already sold the bow. Eventually, he struck. The boar counterattacked. With a wide range of damage, he threw the hero into the air. Vance managed to group himself and land behind the boss. He couldn't beat the boss fairly, so he decided to cheat. After which, she began to lure him along with her. The girls burst into laughter as they watched this running around. Min sighed in disappointment, recognizing Vance as just another upstart. Meanwhile, the hero was moving towards the mountain. Just before that, Vance performed a backflip. With all his might, the boss boar flew into the mountain. Having broken his fangs, he received a certain amount of damage. But it didn't end there, because the impact caused a rockfall. The girls watching this gasped, not expecting such a trick. A minute later, the boss came to his senses, squealing pitifully. The hero was already hiding behind a tree, waiting for the right moment. He waited until the boss lost his balance, and then rushed towards him. Vance moved in and unleashed a long series of quick strikes. But despite all the damage received, the boss still showed signs of life. Stunned, Vance retreated. At one point, he dodged the boar's enraged blow. Moreover, the boss himself has now fallen into a fighting frenzy. In any case, the hero somehow managed to cut off the boss's second fang. After which, Vance made the jump. He raised his sword, aiming the tip at the boss's vulnerable area. After which, having finally finished it off, at this point the battle came to an end. The game itself immediately reacted to Vance's achievement. Immediately he was awarded a new level. Vance was pleased with the achievement, as the goal of rapid development was getting closer. In addition, due to the characteristics of the class, the hero's attributes also increased significantly. When the rewards ran out, the game made a request to Vance. It concerned anonymity in defeating the boss, which the hero refused. A second later, the hero's name and his feat were known throughout the game. Only after this, Mins was able to find out what exactly the guy's name was. But the hero was in no hurry to return to the girls. After defeating himself, the boss left behind a lot of loot. Vance didn't have long to enjoy his awards. Thunder rumbled in the sky, indicating the approach of disaster. The hero was dumbfounded, because the change in the weather was most likely influenced by the talent of chance. In any case, Vance had to hurry and get out of the dangerous area. Suddenly, he was stopped by Mins, who wanted to add him as a friend. Without stopping for pleasantries, the hero immediately sent her a request and moved on. As he ran away, Vance said goodbye. The girl did not at all understand where the hero was in such a hurry. Sometime later, the storm still relentlessly pursued Vance. He himself hurried to the temple. The hero hoped that the local guild would be able to protect him. Vance ran tirelessly, paying no attention to anyone and pushing through the crowd. Only a minute later, they all saw how a storm was approaching the temple. The sky was flashing with lightning, frightening the players. One person noticed this fuss. Her mere appearance made almost everyone bow. Looking at the sky, she recognized the phenomenon there as a disaster. Many understood that this was most likely provoked by one of the players. Moreover, a second later they heard Vance's scream. Varisha, he begged to accept him. But then, from the sky, a special crack was heard and lightning flashed. She wriggled her way toward Vance. The head of the guild finally spotted the hero. Moreover, he was waving an invitation letter. It was then that the guild leader waved her hand towards the hero. At the last moment, a barrier was erected that saved Vance from death. Everything immediately became quiet. The clouds in the sky retreated, and the weather became clear again. The other people present became interested in the hero, since he was the first one who managed to provoke a disaster with his own efforts. After which, the guild members hurried to Vance. Seeing potential in him, they were ready to train the hero. The mentors even had time to quarrel among themselves, since each of them wanted to teach Vance. Vance himself never expected that he would become so popular overnight. For now, he has decided to play his role without revealing his true motives. But then, all the arguing between the mentors was interrupted by the cry of a gorgeous lady. Having intervened, the head of the guild personally took Vance as her apprentice. But first, she asked Vance himself about this desire. The honor shown was so great that at first the hero was unable to utter a word, finally kneeling down. Thus the hero was accepted into the guild. After some time, the action moves to the inner courtyard of the guild's estate. The head presented the property to Vance, showing him where he would train. Afterwards, she expected Vance to visit in about an hour. The hero's heart was pounding. The head of the guild made an indelible impression on him. As agreed, an hour later, Vance showed up at the designated place. However, no one met him there. Having set out to search on his own, the hero came to the palace. Having admired it, he went inside. Immediately, an indignant female scream was heard. The hero recoiled in fear, as he had accidentally entered the guild leader's domain. As quickly as possible, Vance began to ask for forgiveness. This was not enough, and the released magic almost killed the hero. Indignantly, the head of the guild wanted to know by what right Vance had barged in. The hero began to justify himself, because in fact, he was simply looking for masters. Because of the damage he had received, words were hard for him to speak. The guild leader sighed and accepted Vance's words. Afterwards, throwing a pill into his hands, Vance quickly assessed the remedy, which could instantly cure him. The reward was great, so he fell to his knees again and thanked the guildmaster, but she just slammed the door in his face. Vance was in no hurry to take the pill, especially after hearing footsteps behind him. When the steps stopped, the hero turned around. There he saw a girl who introduced herself as Gun. Respectfully, Vance greeted her. The girl announced that she would look after Vance and help him in every possible way. Moreover, due to his high charisma, the hero was automatically liked by her. Blushing every now and then, she called the hero brother. Vance stood up and at first pretended to be thinking about something. Suddenly he jumped up to Gun, trying once again to charm her with his charisma. The girl burst out laughing, and the hero's reputation rose again. Vance enjoyed the experiment, especially since Gun was so easy to follow. Moreover, in this way, the hero could even become a mate for the NPC. In that case, it would open up new gaming possibilities for Vance. But then, for some reason, Vance started coughing up blood. Gunn ran up to him, trying to find out the reason for the blood loss. This situation was a performance, so Vance was testing Gunn's actions. After clearing his throat, he explained to Gunn where he had managed to get injured. The story confused Gunn. She openly considered herself guilty in this whole story. In order to fix everything, she urgently thrust the medicine into the hero's hands. Vance accepted the gift, but begged Gunn not to blame himself. Once again, his words raised the NPC's attitude towards him. After which, she also handed the hero a pendant. It was another gift from her. Vance couldn't help but be delighted, as the pendant was a rare and extremely useful accessory. Afterwards, she asked Vance not to lag behind and to follow her. The hero chuckled to himself, because he was quite good at manipulation. A little later, Vance was taken to the place where spiritual energy was collected. He was given a great honor, since not everyone could visit this place. Vance was well aware of how lucky he was. Moreover, he could increase his level of meditation faster than others. Together with Gunn, he carried out an act of spiritual elevation. At the end of the ceremony, the girl said goodbye to the hero. Left alone, the hero continued his meditation. Much time passed like this until Vance finally woke up in his home. He didn't even notice that he had spent the whole night playing. Moreover, all the game events turned out to be real and not a dream. After all, there was at least $1 million in Vance's bank account. On this new day, a motorcyclist was cutting through the city streets. At some point she stopped. She took off her helmet and took a breath of fresh air. A minute later, she arrived at Vance's. She immediately began to train the hero, because he called her to him at such an early hour. Afterwards, the hero invited her to go inside and evaluate everything. The girl even laughed that the hero somehow managed to rent such a luxurious apartment with her money. The hero confirmed this, which made her really angry. In a matter of seconds, she applied a chokehold. Squeezing her fingers, she asked the hero to repeat what he had said earlier. Afterwards, getting ready to give Vance a good beating. But she was unable to do this, because she felt a strange movement in the hero's pants. Everything stopped at that very second. After thinking and exhaling, she rushed at Vance again. The beating of the hero was postponed again, because right now, there was a knock on the door from the delivery team. After receiving a couple of slaps, Vance finally explained where he got the money. Later, he even invited the psychopath to live with him. The girl readily agreed to this proposal. Given the expenses, Vance had no choice but to return to the game to earn money. But first, the hero had to finish his meditation. The head of the guild personally provided him with spiritual guidance. In order for Vance to succeed, she gave him a development pill. At the same time, the head reported that in addition to spiritual strength, Vance also needed to master combat. Her words awakened in the hero memories of a shameful defeat in a past life. Therefore, Vance commented on the head's speech from a philosophical point of view. For the first time, but without expecting it, the hero managed to raise his reputation with the guild leader. This only meant that even such a gorgeous woman could eventually submit to the hero. Vance quickly dismissed these fantasies, because the purpose was different. In any case, the guild leader expected a feat from Vance, so he should have taken the quest. Before letting him go, she handed the hero one special scroll. The chief insisted that Vance had to study the local knowledge. Time passed, but Vance was in no hurry to do everything as expected. Moreover, gradually more and more players joined the guild. This means that one of them could have become a competitor to Vance. At some point, Vance was called out. It was Minz who also joined the guild. The girl was genuinely glad to meet Vance, but the hero didn't chat with her for long because he was in a hurry. When the hero left, the girls almost got into a fight because they thought Minz was in love. Vance himself came to the quest board. At some point, the manager called the next person to her. Thinking it was his name being called, Vance approached her. The manager encouraged the hero to act wisely and take on a quest based on his skills. Then the hero began to look through the signs. Vance began to scan the area, studying the more difficult quests. At some point, he settled on a particularly difficult quest. The reward experience and skills for doing what tempted Vance. The manager doubted the hero's choice, because such a quest was extremely difficult. Some of the players almost laughed at the choice of hero, believing that the quest was impossible to complete. After all, Vance had to confront someone who was much stronger. After some time, the hero arrived in the city for a quest. It was a remote region, famous for its mists and the creatures that lurked within them. But the hero wasn't interested in monsters. He landed somewhere in the city center. Already on the approach to one building, Vance was met by ardent maidens. After all, celebrations were currently underway in the city itself. The hero listened to the herald, hoping to receive clues for his quest. At some point, one of the guests shouted out that the city was covering up for the murderer. The very moment arrived, and the hero hurried after the man. For money, the man was ready to tell a lot. Having satisfied his request, Vance received information. But the man told only half, promising to provide even more interesting information for an additional fee. Having received the reward this time, the hero learned much more about the details of the quest. Afterwards, the action moved to the high part of the city. The man from the information, the drunkard Joe, was leaving the event. He promised those who remained that he would definitely return. The hero observed his movements from an ambush. Half an hour passed and it was deep night. Barely moving, the drunkard wandered somewhere into the forest. It was now that Vance hurried to catch up with him. Chu instantly sobered up, because he had a battle ahead of him. Considering Vance an insignificant opponent, he rushed at him. However, the hero easily dodged the attack in his direction. But even after missing the first time, Joe did not lose his knack. Having tripped over a stone, he began to spin like a barrel, waving his blade. At some point, Vance managed to parry this spin. Ju never expected that the young warrior would be able to fight back. The hero chuckled, having truly become stronger, although he did not admit it. Joe stamped his foot and prepared his sword for the next round. He swung it, releasing a wave of spiritual energy towards the hero. With a quick gesture, Vance erected a shield for himself. Thus, the hero managed to survive again. The shield only provided temporary protection, but the hero liked this skill. Tired of fighting, Joe offered the hero to surrender in exchange for his life. Vance almost burst out laughing at the audacity of it. And then, Joe tried to cut down the hero again. But no matter how hard he tried, he always missed. Due to constant misses, Joe was almost in despair. And therefore, in the end, he retreated. Vance just hissed discontentedly in his direction. Now the hero made a blow that managed to break through the NPC's defense. For the next couple of minutes, Vance did not let up the pressure. Only later did the hero realize that Joe's stats were lower, and therefore the NPC could not defeat Vance. Finally, one of the blows inflicted a particularly severe injury on Joe. Without finishing him off, the hero demanded that he hand over the secret information. But Joe didn't have time to say anything, because a third person entered the fray. The huge summoned blade nearly cut both of them apart. Seeing the third one, Joe thought that they had come to save him. Joe practically laughed, knowing that the balance of power was now on his side. After all, Talon, who was Joe's older brother, was now looking at the hero. Before fighting, Talon first scolded his brother for his carelessness. Talon himself was ready to let Vance go if he parted with one of his skills. Meanwhile, Joe tried to get some treatment, but suddenly he received new damage. Without giving him a break, Vance pounced on him. Besides the sword strike, he also knocked the elixir out of Joe's hands. Afterwards, the hero turned his attention to Talon. Pointing the tip of his sword, the hero urged him to defend himself. Talon could not tolerate such impudence. He immediately counterattacked, removing almost half of Vance's health. The hero became convinced that Brother Joe was a far more dangerous opponent. Moreover, he actively maneuvered during the battle. The hero defended himself as best he could. The pressure the battle put on him was enormous, so Vance's position was moved. Even though the hero took damage, he was not going to give up. Vance believed it was necessary to find Talon's weak points. In turn, Talon increased the pressure, considering it a shame to lose to some child. Inexorably, Vance's health was declining. Remembering the fast movement skill, the hero decided to use it. Talon laughed and created his own illusions in response. Now, the hero found himself literally surrounded on all sides. Vance may have looked confused, but he knew one weakness of the clones. With the real Talon, they could be distinguished by special features. Ignoring the copies, Vance attacked Talon. Immediately after one sword thrust, the hero carried out a second one. For a short time, the enemy's armor was pierced. Following this, Talon burst into a scream and explosion. Thus, he called upon his inner powers to help him. The next moment, high-speed blows rained down on Vance. The hero couldn't lose, so he took out the pill he had saved beforehand. Vance popped it in his mouth and immediately bit into the pill. The hero was immediately enveloped in a glow, because the pill not only could heal, but also strengthen. Vance let out a sigh of relief as he felt a surge of new strength. Talon grinned and continued the fight. He stubbornly attacked the hero again. But this step was ill-considered, because Vance's health is fully restored. Moreover, the hero also managed to parry Talon's blow. And yet Talon had no doubt of his victory, because he knew that the pill only worked for a short time. Vance, smiling, also adhered to this position. After all, he was going to defeat the enemy within the allotted time. Talon could not understand how Vance had managed to become so powerful in such a short period of time. From now on, he had no choice but to defend himself. Moreover, Vance had no intention of slowing down his pace. The hero only benefited from this fight, as he improved his combat skills. Soon, Talon's health dropped to a critical point. For the first time, Talon thought that in front of him was not an upstart, but a famous fighter of the guild. And yet Talon had no intention of giving up, so I used my special skill. Talon's eyes flinched as he saw Vance dodge with ease. Immediately after this, the hero rushed into battle again. Finally, the hero delivered the finishing blow. Talon screamed and lost all his health. Vance was pleased with himself, for he had got rid of the problem. Both quest characters were defeated, and all conditions were met. But before returning, Vance decided to collect the loot. At some point, the hero had the idea to do something else before leaving. Wanting to continue to improve his reputation among the NPCs, Vance went to collect the gift. The problem was that Vance was a complete novice when it came to gifts. An hour later, Vance was betting on jewelry. Hours later, he returned to the Sword Guild. The other students were stunned when they learned that Vance had managed to complete a quest of the highest difficulty level. Having received the report, the manager considers the quest completed. In addition to experience, the hero was also rewarded with spiritual stones. Vance thanked him, instantly pulling the stones into his inventory. News of Vance's victory spread, so many began to invite him to join their guild. The crowd was so annoying that eventually the hero even had to run away. Luckily, security saved him in time. Only from those players were able to learn that Vance was part of the Sword Guild. The hero himself hurried to the master. With her permission, he went inside. The master wasn't particularly happy about Vance's victory, as he had disobeyed and taken on a quest that was unnecessarily difficult. Humbly, the hero admitted his mistake. With a sigh, the master forgave Vance for his stupidity. At her request, the hero began to tell how exactly the quest went. He also said that he defeated the boss only thanks to the pill he had received earlier. Nodding contentedly, the master presented Vance with a special talisman. The master warned the hero that the talisman should only be used in the most extreme cases. A little later, Vance was also given spiritual growth pills. Bowing, the hero expressed his gratitude and promised to justify the trust. However, after all this, Vance was in no hurry to leave the master's chambers. And then the hero started talking about a special gift that was bought for the master. Taking the silver hairpin in her hands, the master left Vance, ordering him to engage in self-development. The hero's feelings were suppressed. He remained unaware of the master's emotions regarding the gift. But a couple of seconds later, his reputation with the master increased. Overjoyed, he left the master's chambers. But the next moment, something in the distance exploded. The hero was stunned, because he did not understand at all what was happening. At the sight of the explosion, smoke spread in all directions. As it turned out, it was the guild elder whose experiments had failed who revealed himself. While searching for the necessary ingredients, he turned to the players for help. The players hesitated, as they were faced with a quest of the highest difficulty. And only Vance expressed his agreement to take on the task. The elder scratched his beard with interest, having already heard a lot about Vance. The hero also had plans for the old man, as a powerful alchemist. Subsequently, events moved to another point in the game world. Vance wandered around the middle of the dark clearing, looking for the boss. At some point, he heard the sounds of a struggle. Rushing towards them, he accidentally stumbled upon an ongoing battle. Vance quickly determined that players from one guild had attacked the boss. The hero considered their attempts to defeat the boss to be a laughingstock. Be that as it may, Vance had to intervene. The hero walked forward, and the girls he already knew recognized him. Without preludes, the hero demanded that the boss be given to him. Mins didn't have time to answer, because another character joined the conversation. An even more fatal femme stood opposite the hero that Mins began to imagine Vance to be. At the same time, Mins whispered that it was the hero who gave information about the blacksmith. The head of the Moonshadow Guild made it clear to the hero that she could not give up the boss. Just in case, in a softer form, Mins repeated these same words. Vance wasn't angry. On the contrary, he knew that the guild couldn't stand against the boss. In his rage, he would definitely have won. In addition, the boss periodically placed debuffs on the players. After which, with powerful blows, he got rid of several at once. The hero continued his speech, reporting that the boss had many hidden phases of the fight. Not wanting to listen any longer, the guild leader called on everyone to rush into battle. Along the way, she summoned shackles to immobilize the boss. Following this, she summoned wildfires. Balls of flame began to fall around the boss, eventually setting him on fire. Vance sighed, knowing that such tactics could only anger the boss. After all, with the boss's anger, his damage and attack speed increased. The boss, going into a rage mode, spotted his offender. Opening his beak, he hurried to the head of the guild. Just one hit, and most of the guild leader's health was knocked out. But it wasn't that simple. Even in a dying state, unleashing a new magical attack on the boss. Because of what he saw this time, Vance even called the guild leader stupid. Vance was willing to help defeat the boss, asking only for special loot in exchange. Without thinking twice, the girls readily agreed. Having received consent, Vance began to explain how one should behave with the boss, explaining in detail which attacks worked better. Under his strict control, the guild leader acted. Finally, things started to go in the right direction. While restricting the boss's movements, other players moved forward to deal damage to him, as instructed by Vance. Smiling broadly, the guild leader sincerely thanked the hero. Unexpectedly, another guild appeared in this place. Their clatter caught Vance's attention. Competitors did not hide the fact that they also wanted to get the boss. The situation was escalating, and the conflict could have led to bloodshed. The girls' guild was unwilling to back down, if only for the sake of its own reputation. On the other hand, they could not fight on two fronts at once. Vance volunteered to help again, this time demanding extra payment. After thinking for a bit, the hero received consent. Immediately after this, rushing towards the boss. Events developed incredibly quickly. The competitor's leader laughed out loud, considering Vance a complete madman. The next moment, he ordered his warriors to attack the members of the women's guild. They in turn drew their blades and prepared to respond. Another moment and a battle began between them. Swords thundered, flashes of magic were heard. At times, all this was interrupted by the death cries of the dead. But no matter how bravely the girls fought, their numbers were reduced. The warriors of the rival guild licked their lips, already anticipating how they would take possession of the bodies of those. They promised to grant them a quick death. Their leader called what was happening an important lesson that the girls had to remember. Chuckling, he was already imagining how, after victory, he would also take possession of the boss. Suddenly he got distracted, because one of the players was calling him to look at something. A system notification appeared, proclaiming Vance's victory over the boss. Then the hero himself appeared, confirming the event out loud. Afterwards, he called on the girls to share the prizes. The members of the rival guild were shocked by what happened. Their leader was so enraged that he ordered Vance to be eliminated immediately. A pair of warriors quickly moved towards Vance. One of them wanted to use his signature spiritual attack on the hero. Vance merely moved to the side, causing the attacker to fly past. Without missing the opportunity, the hero attacked in response. Just one hit and huge damage was inflicted on the player. The hero could barely contain his laughter, as he had no idea who he was dealing with. Thanks to the reaction from his past life, Vance acted with lightning speed. The player simply had no chance to resist. Finally, with a third blow, Vance finished him off. The player died and a tombstone was formed in his place. Afterwards, the hero began to explain that it was not worth touching. Otherwise, they promised terrible punishment. However, the enemy players did not heed Vance's warning. Their actions were truly stupid. Vance waited for the right moment and delivered a dozen quick sword strikes. Thus, all the enemies nearby were destroyed at once. Vance waited meekly to see who would challenge him next. Gritting his teeth, the rival leader called on the survivors to retreat. At this point, the clash came to an end. It's time to share the loot from the boss. Vance hoped the girls' guild would keep its word. They were so impressed by Vance's intervention that they were willing to part with all their items. The hero stood his ground, intending only to take what had been previously agreed upon. Then, after consulting among themselves, Mins performed one manipulation. The next moment, a large cash deposit arrived on Vance's card. Moreover, the leader of the women's guild extended her hand to the hero, introducing herself as Loana. Vance shook hands and introduced himself in return. Thus, the hero made a new acquaintance. However, the name Loana evoked some confused memories in the hero's mind. At some point, Vance had an epiphany. In her past life, she was a prominent gambler and the daughter of a tycoon. Determined not to miss the opportunity, Vance began to enjoy her aura of wealth. At some point, his stroking was interrupted by Mins. Later, the hero said goodbye to the girls and left. Left alone, Loai began to speak flatteringly about Vance. Someone was secretly eavesdropping on their conversation. Hiding among the thickets was Sin, the most popular streamer. Having waited for the right moment, she addressed her audience. In addition to the guild battle, its viewers actively discussed Vance's personality. Sin liked the hero so much that she openly called him her idol. Later, someone else watched the recording of this broadcast with indignation. For himself, he recognized Vance as his worst enemy. He swore that he would kill him at the first meeting. A little after all these events, Vance returned to the Elder. The Elder was glad that the ingredients had finally been delivered to him, at the same time throwing some kind of reward towards the hero. The small box landed in Vance's palms. Having opened it, the hero discovered useful pills inside. Without missing a beat, Vance brought up some special pills. The Elder knew about these, but still could not recreate them. The elder's eyes nearly popped out of his head when he learned that Vance had heard something about the pills. After thinking, the hero named one recipe with precision. As quickly as possible, the elder ran to Vance. He asked the hero to help him with alchemy. With the help of that advice, at some point the alchemical cauldron exploded. The lid flew off and 2 ready pills rose into the air. Delighted with his success, the elder gave one of them to Vance. The hero accepted the gift, smelling like another rare pill. With all sincerity, he thanked the elder. However, the elder did not intend to let the hero go so quickly, after which, Vance received an invitation to become the elder's apprentice. But then the voice of the guild leader was heard. She was unhappy that the elder was trying to take away her student. Vance never expected her to appear in all her glory. Her sudden appearance even confused the hero a little. The elder justified himself by saying that he only wanted to teach Vance alchemy. Vance let out a sigh when it became clear that the guild leader wasn't angry at anyone. However, she saw Vance's future as becoming a spiritual warrior. However, she left some chance in the future that the hero would be allowed to become an alchemist. Once again, the hot woman's burning gaze pierced the hero. The elder did not dare argue with such a decision, after which he returned to his business. The head of the guild herself ordered Vance to follow her. Frightened by her imperiousness, the hero agreed with a trembling voice. In another part of the guild, she started a not very pleasant conversation with the hero. The guild leader believed that Vance was not particularly pleased with her as his mentor, so Vance was quick to dispel these myths. The hero offered a sincere apology for causing the guild leader to worry. She listened to him with caution. Glancing at her occasionally, Vance realized that the head of the guild had softened. Falling on his knees and acknowledging her as the greatest master, the hero wanted to achieve a better effect. Vance insisted that he could not have found a better mentor. His words were successful, and his reputation with the guild leader increased. The hero could not hide his joy at what had happened. With a sigh, the guild leader forgave Vance. Immediately, the hero presented his mentor with a new gift. It was one of the pills Vance had received as a reward from the elder. Even though the mentor was interested, she left the gift for the hero. The hero was angry, because for the first time his gift was rejected. Therefore, he forcibly thrust the box into the mentor's hands. Vance insisted that he wouldn't grieve over the lost pill, because one day he would make his own. The head of the guild was silent, not knowing how to react. At some point, a light laugh was heard from her side. Her smile and seductive voice touched Vance's heart. The hero looked away shyly and hoped that everything had gone well. Unable to resist, the teacher accepted the gift. The reputation was raised again, and the mentor was ready to grant secret techniques in return. Shaking her hips, she asked the hero to follow her. The hero agreed and bowed to her back. Only from behind did he notice that the hairpin he had previously given her was now adorned in his mentor's hair. A little later, Vance began to master new combat techniques. With every minute spent in meditation, the hero's parameters grew. Feeling a surge of energy, the hero grabbed the hilt of the sword. Finally, Vance snatched it and swung it, performing a special combat skill. The fiery glow from the sword's swing shone in the air for a long time. Vance admired the skill and even considered selling it. At some point, the hero's meditation was interrupted. Gun disturbed him because she wanted something. The girl said that she had 3 quests to complete. She also complained that she was unable to master the skills properly. In a low voice, Gun complained that the erotic novel was to blame for everything. In order to distract her from her lewd thoughts, Vance took the girl by the hand. Afterwards, agreeing to complete Gun's quests, she almost began to shine with joy. Later, as part of the quest, Vance went to another location. However, the hero did not arrive there alone, but accompanied by Gun. Leading the way, she told about the disaster that had befallen the village. At the same time, voicing the details of the local quest. Nodding, Vance began to study the village. A long search led him to a well. Even as we approached, we could see a glow coming from there. At some point, the well filled with voices. Then, an angry entity burst out from there. Frightened, Gun drew her sword. Then she rushed to defend Vance. But suddenly, other spirits began to emerge from the well. Vance never expected there to be so much evil there. Gun concluded that most likely the entire village had turned into undead. Afterwards, she was overcome by a burning desire to drive them out. The hero, of course, hastened to help her. And then, swinging their blades, they both unleashed special skills on the undead. However, without noticing it, Gun was always one step ahead of Vance. She rushed towards the demon who was to blame for everything. The next moment, a huge ghostly hand emerged from a nearby house. But the ghost's fingers did not close, because Gun herself struck them painfully. Afterwards, for a very short time, everything became quiet. When the pause ended, a haughty laugh was heard. Rejoicing at the arrival of the guild members, someone emerged from the thick fog. The villain promised that he would certainly deal with them. From just one glance at him, Vance realized that the enemy was much stronger than previously thought. Hearing the hero's words, the villain laughed, but confirmed them. At some point, he changed his plans, deciding to turn the guild's students into spirits. Not wanting such a fate, Gun ran out to meet him. Seeing the movement of his opponents, the villain warned them not to touch the puppet spirits. Of course, his call was ignored. As she moved, Gun called upon spiritual powers. Being in the flow of a huge wave of energy, she pointed a sword towards the villain. The two forces were about to clash, and even the sky reacted to it. The hero tensed up, because he was rather superfluous in this battle. The only thing Vance could do to help was to occasionally distract the villain's attention from himself. But before the fight started, the villain threw the jug out of his inventory. He flew past Gun without any obstacles. The jug hit the ground, causing the cork to blow off. The next moment, a thick cloud began to pour out of the jug. Then there was a screech, and an evil spirit appeared from the cloud. Shocked by what he saw, Vance took a couple of steps back. Meanwhile, the evil spirit opened its mouth, from which a long tongue stuck out. But he was not destined to help his master in battle, for Vance intervened. The hero took on the ghost, and Gun left the villain. The ghost was angry and threatened to devour Vance. To this, the hero responded with a long series of quick sword strikes. The damage dealt was great, so the ghost entered its second phase, taking the form of a swarm of bats. At some point, the bats all squeaked at once, causing a debuff. Vance's stats dropped, but he remained calm, considering that now is the best moment to use the new attack skill. Calling upon spiritual powers, Vance imbues the sword with the power of flame. Then he swung the weapon. As the blade flew, a wave of fire and light burst out into the surrounding world. Then, massive pops were heard. Those were the bats exploding due to the skill's effect. Vance praised the skill, considering it the most useful of those currently available. At the same time, Gun managed to gain the upper hand in the fight with the villain. Even though he received serious wounds, he was not going to give up. Vance, who considered Gun a worthy warrior, was watching all this. At the same time, the villain threatened that he would take revenge even after death. Unwilling to listen any longer, Gun raised her sword. In her next move, she cut the villain in half. When he died, he released a pinkish gas from his body. Not expecting such a trick, Gun accidentally inhaled it. The girl began to fall, gasping for breath, and the hero hurried to her. Her face was distorted, and overall Gun looked terrible. Gun showed signs of life, although she began to behave somewhat strangely. Gradually, the demon had a strange effect on her. Gun blushed and, looking at Vance, began to bite her lips. Afterwards, she even placed his hand on her hot chest. With her whole appearance, she made it clear that she wanted intimacy and urgently. Gradually, Vance's lips moved closer to hers. His mind was immediately filled with an erotic fantasy about Gun. However, he resisted the temptation and pushed her away. Vance breathed heavily, knowing that the girl was only acting like this because of the demon's influence. Although I was a little upset about the lost chance, gradually, he turned his attention to the cursed well. A moment later, Vance rushed to the well, because only there could he get an antidote for Gun. He jumped inside at full speed. Soon, Vance found himself at the very bottom, in the middle of terrible darkness. Remains belonging to the villagers lay everywhere. The safety did not last long, because from somewhere a wind blew towards the hero. The blight dealt damage to Vance, and also reanimated the skeletons. They began to grab the hero by the edges of his clothes, preventing him from moving normally. Stubbornly, under fear of death, Vance continued to explore the well. Among another pile of bones, he spotted a bottle of elixir. It was a chance to save Gun, so Vance sped up. As it approached, the impact of the filth naturally increased. Recalling one of his skills, the hero used a spiritual shield. For a time, the barrier protected Vance. However, the barrier's effect was short-lived. Moreover, the filth also gave a stubborn resistance. And so, in a hurry, Vance grabbed the elixir. Afterwards, without stopping, he began to climb the walls of the well. However, no matter how fast the hero was, the curse stubbornly followed. Almost at the very exit of the well, the shield's effect dissipated, and the curse managed to strike Vance. Having received an incredible amount of damage, the hero was thrown out of the well. Luckily enough, he landed on the exhausted Gun. The girl looked bad, her condition worsened second by second. Having uncorked the bottle, Vance quickly poured the elixir into her mouth. Having done this, the hero became dumb. Due to the curse, his health dropped to almost zero. At that very moment, Gun came to her senses. Next, her eyes dropped downwards. She saw Vance lying on top of her. Without remembering what had happened, her imagination began to paint passionate scenes of the possible. Having had her fill of those, the girl suddenly became hysterical. She squealed and slapped Vance. Everything went according to the worst-case scenario, and Gun's reputation was completely lost. When the girl's hysteria subsided, she looked around. By chance, she noticed a bottle of elixir lying nearby. It dawned on her that she had jumped to conclusions. Gun guessed that for her sake, Vance sank to the very bottom of the damned well. Afterwards, she reached out to the hero. Turning him around, Gun saw severe wounds on his back. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized Vance had suffered serious injuries. Subsequently, she burst into tears, apologizing along the way. Coming to her senses, she picked up Vance, hurrying back to the guild. She hoped that the guild would be able to save the hero. The next day, Gun reached the original city. Players were confused when they saw an NPC helping another player. Only a few of them were able to recognize in the boy Vance, who had already managed to become a little famous. But not everyone was happy that so much attention was given to the hero. This was especially true for a man named Tanho. A little later, Gun delivered the hero to the guild. It was unclear how long later, but Vance opened his eyes. He turned his head, seeing a figure in the passage. The figure was enveloped in a terrifying aura, and its owner was an elder. Getting out of bed, Vance began to give thanks for his salvation. The elder interrupted the hero without asking for thanks. Suddenly, the elder introduced himself to the hero as Grandfather Gun. Vance was surprised, because Gun had such important relatives. Afterwards, with even greater zeal, the hero began to thank. The elder passed by, making it clear that he did not need such low bows. In return, demanding that Vance stay away from Gun. This was the condition for saving the hero from death. At that very moment, Gun herself intervened in the situation. As it turned out, the girl overheard part of the men's conversation. The elder began to joke and lie that he had nothing against Vance. Walking past, Gun sat down opposite the hero. Vance could still feel the elder's withering, vengeful gaze on him. So dryly, Vance thanked Gun for saving him. With his whole appearance, the hero demonstrated that he was sincere. His smile and look somewhat embarrassed the girl. A romantic atmosphere reigned, which was interrupted by Grandfather Gun's cough. This made Vance come to his senses and pull away. The girl was not offended, because she remembered the feat that Vance had undertaken, in connection with which she called the hero a true gentleman. Vance hid his depression, because with every word from Gun, he felt danger from her grandfather. Gun herself kept glancing at the hero with interest. A notification from the system immediately appeared, informing them that Vance was loved. Fantasies again took over the hero's mind. He imagined scenes of himself hugging a fragile girl. All of this was incredibly sweet to Vance, but even now, the fiction was dispelled by Grandfather Gun's deliberate cough. The hero even decided to joke that he was ready to look for medicine for Grandpa Gun. With a playful chuckle, Grandfather Gun asked Vance to follow him. The action moved beyond the Sky Castle. Grandfather Gun led the hero along, wanting to give him something. Soon, their path led them to a place where many different kinds of animals lived. Vance was amazed by their abundance. He even thought about taking someone for himself. Vance even hastened to report that the elder really liked the gardens and grounds. However, Grandfather Gun did not appreciate such words. Then, the hero thought about how to please the old man, and thereby get something for himself. Therefore, in the future, he began to praise the old man's possessions. Along the way, it was noted that there were no spirit animals present in the lands. Suddenly, the elder started shouting, thinking that Vance had insulted him. Then, taking the hero by the scruff of the neck, he dragged him somewhere. But in fact, that's exactly what Vance was after. Soon, the elder brought Vance to a special place where only spirit beasts lived. The elder assured that any of the beasts could easily defeat Vance. Suddenly, Gun's whisper was heard, telling about one of the strongest beasts here. The elder hid it, fearing that Vance would laugh at it. In any case, the elder gave the hero the right to choose one of the animals he liked. Gun got involved in the situation, asking her grandfather to give the hero a truly valuable animal. Moreover, openly considering Vance worthy of it. The hero enjoyed women's touches, and even regretted that he had spent so little time on them in his past life. Finally, Gun pointed to the wolf, which she considered a worthy beast. She also pointed out a couple more creatures. At that moment, something rolled head over heels down the slope. The animal caught Vance's attention. In that funny appearance, he immediately recognized Iron Eater. This is precisely what the hero chose. An elder stepped into the situation and suddenly refused Vance. He absolutely did not want to give such a baby to the hero. In turn, Gun took the animal from the elder. Running around her grandfather, she handed the little animal back to Vance. The old man rushed at the hero again, wanting to take back what was his. Gun stood up to defend the hero, spreading her legs wide. Having got some time, she asked the hero to urgently tame the animal. The hero began to act strictly according to the girl's instructions. As quickly as possible, Vance smeared the animal's forehead with his blood. The deed was done, and the old man could no longer influence it in any way. The process of entering into spiritual contact has begun. Both souls were transported to the secret kingdom. There Vance met an animal that refused to serve. The hero tried to appease him by promising delicacies. Vance acted cunningly, using knowledge from a past life. However, Iron Eater doubted this proposal. Then Vance hinted at a secret bamboo forest. The mere thought of this dish amazed the little animal. Continuing, the hero tempted the Iron Eater with the secret of a special fruit. Ultimately, Vance's words made the animal come down faster. He asked to stop. He was incredibly hungry. Now, the most important moment of the agreement has arrived. The man and the beast touched, making a mutual promise to cooperate. At this point, the taming was complete. Even after, Vance gave his word that he would feed the animal regularly. After all, he was not just a pet, but a strong comrade in arms. The hero's joy didn't last long, as a system message appeared announcing a game update. Vance was surprised, because in his past life, the game was updated only after a couple of months, not days. After which, he quickly said goodbye to Gun, promising to return soon. The girl was sorry to part, and yet she hoped for a new meeting. At this point, the gaming session was interrupted. At that very moment, Vance's phone rang. A girl wrote to Tom and invited him to her birthday party. The hero looked closely at her avatar. He found something very familiar in her appearance. Vance was invited to a family celebration that would include very distant relatives. One of them was Vance's cousin. Hella had a hard time growing up. Vance was always quick to come to her aid. The hero immediately got into a fight, but often the balance of power was not in Vance's favor, even though he was often beaten while saving his cousin. Hella could only stand aside and beg for mercy, but no matter how much she begged or cried, the beatings continued to the end. Each time Vance took the hit. As a result, his appearance changed greatly. But even in this form, Hell sincerely appreciated it. Such self-sacrifice managed to create a strong bond between brother and sister. Over the years, their paths diverged greatly. Only Hell occasionally tried to contact Vance. The hero regretted that in his past life he had actively avoided contact with her. Moreover, at that time, poor Hell's life turned out tragically. So, Vance packed his things and went to the meeting. A strange city greeted him with noisy streets. The hero knew that this time he would not make the mistakes of the past. The first thing Vance did was visit the hospital. After all, this is where Hell worked. Suddenly, noise and din began to spread through the hospital corridors. Someone was urgently transported on a gurney. The daughter leaned over the body, begging her father to hold on. At that very moment, imperceptibly, Vance decided to apply his knowledge. Thanks to his efforts, the man began to breathe. The doctor who was nearby looked sideways at the hero, because he noticed movements coming from his side. But there was no time for talking, so the patient was immediately taken further. Realizing that the hero had helped the sick man, the girl was ready to repay him. The hero doubted the answer, because he only improved the poor fellow's condition, but did not cure him. Vance did not hide the fact that without special potions he would not last long. What she heard fell on the girl's shoulders like a heavy burden. The pain in her soul was so unbearable that she asked to lean on Vance. The hero nodded, and she pressed herself closer. Vance was genuinely sympathetic, but there was nothing more he could do. Moreover, after swaying her hips, the girl left him. Now, the hero had to return to the search for his sister. At some point, among the hospital corridors, he saw her. Hella, of course, immediately recognized her brother. Vance's whole demeanor showed that he was glad to see her. A moment later, he rushed to hug her. Hella shuddered, because she had never expected such closeness. Later, she took the hero to her place of residence. The hero found the surrounding environment depressing. Only after laughing in response did Hella invite Vance in. The hero studied the situation, comparing it with how his sister behaved in her past life. She lived extremely poorly, although she actively supported Vance with money. At some point, she noticed that the hero stood still and looked around. Vance joked that he was looking for the bathroom. Taking this normally, Hella showed her brother where he could get a change of clothes. Opening the closet, the hero suddenly discovered men's clothes inside. Hearing this, Hella laughed, saying that she wanted to give it to Vance. The hero even cried a little because of his sister's concern. Anyway, sometime later, Vance took a shower. By the time he got out of the bath, Hella had already prepared food. Even as he approached, the hero saw that his favorite dishes were on the table. Suddenly, the sister started talking about money, being ready to help Vance financially. But she didn't have time to do anything at all. Vance stopped her, declaring that he didn't need anything. As proof, Vance himself transferred funds to his sister. She almost lost her power of speech, believing that the hero was involved in crime. Vance made no secret of the fact that he made money playing the game. Hella was shocked, as she had previously considered making money through games to be a mere fiction. Moreover, Vance wanted to take his sister into his complete care. The sister did not want such gifts, which caused Vance to become indignant. After a couple of loud words, Hella was forced to keep the money she received from the hero. Vance was pleased that a quarrel had ultimately been avoided. Gradually, night fell upon the city. Hella wouldn't mind Vance staying with her. She even burst out laughing when the hero thought that she wanted to sleep in the same bed, after which she gave up her bed to the hero. An hour later, silence reigned in the dwelling. For some reason, sleep did not come to Vance for a long time. He was thinking, and the surrounding smells kept reminding him of Hella. Unable to bear the torment, he went to the room where she slept. The hero woke her up because he had one question. Then Vance sat confidently on the edge of the sofa. Sighing, he started talking about firing Hella. The sister didn't want to hear about such a thing, much less become a kept woman. Then Vance suggested that she change her job. First of all, wanting to see my sister closer to me. Hella blushed, sensing the ambiguity in Vance's words. Suddenly, the hero suggested that she play together. Almost the entire night passed while we discussed this conversation. The very next day, Hella was actively discussing all of this. When she entered one of the offices, pieces of paper suddenly flew into her face. The staff congratulated her on her birthday. The most diligent of them all was Dr. Zhang. The doctor himself actively hinted that he had feelings for Hella. His plans primarily concerned taking possession of Hella's body, and for this, Zhang was ready to spend a lot of money. Suddenly, Vance showed up at this celebration. After all, the hero prepared a truly worthy gift for his sister. Zhang never expected that his competitor would be rich. Afterwards, the hero decided to say hello to him. As he shook hands, Vance decided to wait and see what cards Zhang had up his sleeve. Soon, the action moved to the street. The crowd that had gathered from the hospital discussed Hella's gift car. Everyone could only guess how much it could cost. Zhang was indignant to himself, because he considered Vance poor. Ultimately, he decided to belittle Vance by saying that the sports car was too small for everyone, offering Vance to ride in the car with one of the guests. The hero couldn't be fooled, because he was prepared for everything. On the silk of his fingers, a hired bus pulled up to the hospital. It was to that one that he sent all the guests. So Vance kept his sister close to him. Each time he reported that the car was that gift. Even in this situation, he did not give up trying to convince Hell to quit her job. The hero was persistent, making the girl think. Later, the action moved to a restaurant. It was an elite place, which required a lot of trouble to get into. Zhang felt superior for the first time as he watched Vance's intense admiration for the establishment. But then the hero started talking about the hall higher up, where there were often better seats and views. The hint of this made Zhang freeze. Zhang nodded, smiling, although he had planned to hold the celebration somewhere cheaper. But for the sake of Hella's luscious body, Zhang still decided to fork out the money. Afterwards, the birthday girl and all the guests went up to the top floor. Hella was impressed by the holiday and was already planning to thank her. Meanwhile, Vance had all sorts of conversations with Zhang. At some point, Zhang started talking about the hero's poverty. The hero sighed, partly telling about himself, but realizing that Zhang was trying to extract information. Thanks to Vance, Zhang was deceived. Overjoyed, he even ordered wine. Soon a busty girl appeared with a tray. With pleasure, she began to fill the customers' glasses. She hoped that the guests would like the wine. Zhang boasted every now and then that he had spared no expense for Hella. For all his smiles and general friendly atmosphere, Vance was in no hurry to drink his wine. The hero felt that something had been mixed into the drink. So, finding an excuse, he took his leave. Vance did not give up, simply recognizing Zhang as a skilled opponent. Only Hella did not understand what was happening. After he left, Zhang asked all the guests to drink to the birthday girl's health. Of course, everyone agreed to this. After some time, most of them became terribly drunk. Without disturbing them, Zhang crept up to Hella. Carefully, he lifted the girl into his arms. After which, he slowly carried her to his room. Already there, he roughly threw the girl onto the bed. Drooling, the doctor was about to charge her for all expenses. Moreover, they also planned to make money from spicy photos. Being completely drunk, Hell had no way of defending herself. It was then that Vance burst into the animal's room. Zhang looked around in fear, not expecting guests. The next moment, Vance jumped towards him. Right on the move, he hit Zhang hard. The hotel staff heard a similar commotion. As quickly as possible, they ran into Zhang's room. There they found Vance beating the doctor. One after another, the heroes stubbornly struck, ending with a direct hit on the pervert's dignity. The hero then turned to the staff, openly accusing Zhang of mass poisoning. The hotel staff looked at each other, not understanding anything. Moreover, Vance had dirt on Zhang. Having heard all this, the doctor asked for mercy. promising to confess to everything. As a result, he was released by Vance. Later, the hero's sister also switched from drugs to wine. Vance actively helped her. Unable to contain her emotions, Hella burst into tears. Vance reassured her, telling her that he had acted like a true brother. After some time, he brought Hella home. Then Vance returned to his place. What happened left a heavy mark on his heart. This was especially true when it came to separation. Even though his sister promised to visit Vance, it didn't make things any easier for him. Whatever the case, the game came first for Vance. The hero had to level up, earn money, and go through exciting stories. But more importantly, Vance wanted to stay ahead of the curve. Putting on the helmet, he connected himself to the game. The game update greeted Vance with balance changes. Suddenly, the hero decided to examine his inventory. With a wave of his hand, he summoned a table of cells in front of him. There, he discovered various objects with their own properties. In connection with the update, the hero was thinking about the growth of his spiritual classification. But all this would first force Vance to find a lot of resources. In connection with this, the hero decided to begin this process little by little. Suddenly, his gaze touched the little animal. He was dozing, and Vance demanded that the little animal get to work. The little animal rolled over onto its back, complaining that it was deathly hungry, especially since he reminded Vance of the promise of tons of food. But the hero himself pretended as if he had not heard anything like that. This answer disappointed the animal, and its loyalty to Vance fell. The system notified the hero about this, and he almost fell to the ground. It turned out that Vance had completely forgotten that in this game, everyone had a reputation. So, changing his tune, Vance began to promise the little animal that he would do his duty. The little animal snorted and obeyed this time. At the same time, Vance visited a certain location. Along the way, the hero talked about updating the game. After all, it brought with it 3 dungeons at once. Some of them were solo, while others required teamwork. Vance intended to begin his pursuit of resources from these dungeons. Moreover, one of them, the most difficult one, was currently in particular demand. Suddenly, something puzzled Vance. The other players blocked the way. Their attitude towards the hero was clearly unfriendly. One of them, named Van, even challenged the hero. Vance recalled that duels were allowed if the players' levels were not significantly different. Moreover, the other player acted legitimately, without violating any other rules of the game. In this way, players could elevate their guild above others. The hero was not averse to a fight, but demanded a reward in case of his victory. Van was not averse, and put the guild's development points on the line. Vance should have given a symmetrical answer, although he could not do so. And then someone called out to Vance. Gun appeared and placed a bet in Vance's place. Vance would welcome her visit, as well as her emergency intervention. As the stakes increased, Wong demanded that his allies help him. Even though it was much less, Van still answered. Later, the action moved to the location where the fights took place. Right now, a duel has just ended there. The wounded loser swallowed dust, and people spoke of the winner as nothing less than a beast. It was Goro, a disciple of the sect. Soon, other footsteps were heard in the arena. An elder appeared who wanted to take Goro as his disciple, but for some reason he himself got distracted. After all, Gun appeared on the scene. A striking beauty rushed past him. Her beauty made Goro's mouth water. However, the girl didn't come for that reason. It turned out that the elder was her brother. He himself introduced Gun to the outstanding Goro, but Gun wasn't interested in that at all, and she pointed in another direction. Everyone focused on the direction, seeing Vance there. The hero felt how unfriendly glances were directed at him. The elder didn't like Vance and wanted to embarrass him in front of his sister. He entrusted this task to his new student, Goro. Oddly enough, Vance refused to fight him. Van appeared behind, and the hero accepted his challenge. Everyone was surprised, because in their opinion, Wong was a much stronger opponent. Van himself was worried that Vance could go back on his words at any moment. However, the hero didn't think about anything like that. From now on, the elder disliked him even more, considering Vance also arrogant. The only person who was rooting for him was Gun. The conversation ended and Vance asked Van to begin. He smiled and pulled his sword from its sheath. Following this, he immediately took aim at the hero. However, his sword only hit the ground. Vance simply vanished from the scene of the impact. A moment later, he made his presence known. Being faster, the hero hit him with his knee, and then he put his weapon into action. It landed straight on the opponent's back. Having received considerable damage, Van screamed. Despite being seriously wounded, he managed to escape the next attack. He subsequently called upon his aura, wishing to defeat Vance with combat technique. Having accumulated enough energy, he released it at the hero. Vance didn't wait for the defeat and swung his sword back. At some point, both blades met. Then Vance used all his strength. Coming out of the wedge, he pushed Van, hitting him several times in the air. Everyone watched with bated breath as he fell. After this, the victory was of course awarded to Vance. Gun was almost jumping for joy. However, her brother did not share the emotions. He mumbled something and left. Meanwhile, the streamer announced this event again. Sin thus proved that the battle had been entirely fair. She herself, every now and then, breathlessly pronounced the hero's name. At the present moment, Goro was assessing Vance's movements, after which he called him. Suddenly, Goro admitted that Vance was stronger than himself, but promised to correct this in the future. In front of everyone, he swore an oath to surpass the hero in skill. Vance remained silent, but from his past life he knew that Goro would achieve great things. Then Gun appeared and began to praise Vance for his victory. They started talking, and the girl felt as if the hero was not happy with this kind of care. The hero grinned, hoping one day that everything would turn out the other way around. These words touched Gun, who believed that Vance had a romantic interest in her. Then Vance suddenly changed the subject. The hero hoped that the girl would be free soon. After all, Vance wanted to invite her to unwind. Gun was confused. She didn't know what answer to give. Vance gave her some hints so that if she went away, everyone would think that the girl had gone on a quest. Nodding approvingly, she left, promising to meet the hero again. Vance was pleased with himself, because he clearly had a date coming up. With this feeling, he left the arena. Upon exiting there, he was met by Minz. She informed the hero that she enjoyed the duel very much. But she didn't come just like that, but in order to enlist Vance's support. Unfortunately for her, the hero was not interested in anything like that. Minz rushed after him, wanting to know the price for his help. Without stopping, Vance began talking about the need for a group for the raid. But he understood that among the girls' guild, there were no fighters free to do something like this yet. Minz did not let him go, offering to visit another dungeon. The location she named interested Vance. After all, she was counting on his interest in concluding an agreement. Vance chuckled contentedly, and hoped that the leader of the women's guild would take part in the raid. Minz readily confirmed this. Having learned of Luana's presence, the hero agreed to help. Minz warned Vance not to get carried away by his fantasies, as Luana was a complex person. The hero was not afraid of anything, especially when it came to the real world. At that very moment, Hao appeared nearby. Promising a lot of money, he asked Vance for help in passing the dungeon. However, the hero did not recognize it at all. In this regard, Hao had to remind about their meeting at the beginning. But this time Vance refused, because Means had already given his word. The hero even had the courage to hint to her about a live meeting. The girl was embarrassed, unable to answer, or even to argue. Hao doubted this whole story, believing that the hero was collecting money for the sake of marriage. Vance shuddered at what he heard. But then he remembered. Coughing, he revealed that he had in fact been actively changing women. Hao was angry because Minz had once again crossed him. Much later, the hero continued his journey with Minz. Without missing a beat, Vance thanked her for her help. The girl guessed that all the words the hero had spoken earlier were just a cover. Later, the action moved to the entrance to the dungeon. Besides Vance and Means, there were a ton of other players there. For some reason, the hero looked at them with satisfaction. At some point, Minz saw the head of her guild among them. She and the other girls from the guild turned around. Luana greeted Vance personally. The hero immediately began to voice his demands for cooperation. The first thing Vance wanted was to gain command. The second condition was that Vance wanted to take all the rare resources. And at the very end, he whispered to Luana about the spiritual stones. Luana hesitated because her guild also needed the latter. But the hero did not intend to borrow the stones, but to return them over time, even with interest. After thinking about it, Luana agreed to give Vance the stones. Immediately, an impressive number of them were transferred to his inventory. This was enough, and Vance called all the girls to follow him. He quickly assessed the composition of the group. One by one, they all walked through the portal. Only once inside the dungeon did the girls discover with horror that the level of completion was the maximum. The girls became worried, thinking that Vance had made some mistake. The hero didn't think so, explaining what exactly was worth fearing. Afterwards, he asked them to follow him strictly. In fact, Vance knew the dungeon very well. Cautiously, his group continued on their way. At some point, they passed a lonely building. The girls held on, but some of them were already afraid of meeting something unknown. During this trip, Luana called Minz. Quietly, she hinted at one thing that Minz was now standing on. Gradually, Minz lowered her gaze. Afterwards, her frightened squeal was heard. Even in such a dangerous dungeon, the girls found time for jokes. Their mischievous laughter attracted unnecessary attention. The wind blew, and a demon appeared before them. His appearance was truly disgusting. This time, the girls screamed in real horror. The demon did not attack, but rather warned of trouble if the group continued to walk. Calling himself a guardian, the demon reported that only he was capable of surviving. His manner of speech and appearance caused tremors among the raid participants. Vance urged them not to panic and remain calm, after which he walked past the guard, asking the girls to do the same. The guard was discouraged and even decided to ask Vance for something. Turning around, the hero was ready to listen, and then the guard began to issue a quest to find items. In exchange for these, the guard promised to gift them with special secret equipment. The hero willingly accepted the task. Afterwards, the guard saw off the raid participants, wishing them good luck. Later, Vance led the raid to the next point of interest. From there, a view of the fog-shrouded mountains opened up. But right in the middle of the fog, dozens of evil spirits were hiding. The girls, of course, were horrified by this again. Only Lawana kept her composure and called for an attack. Having supported her, one of the raid participants rushed forward. She flew into the thick of things. Having accepted the battle, the evil spirits also came forward. But Vance and the other players had already met them. Just one small victory, and loot started pouring out everywhere. The girls were amazed by the hero's incredible luck. No matter how much Vance didn't want to, he couldn't reveal his secret. The hero didn't show off for long because a huge dead man emerged from the fog behind him. Luckily, the girls warned him about the threat in time. Vance quickly turned around and stabbed with his sword. The fog cleared, and on his sword remained the item that the guard needed. Minz was delighted with her success, as she could immediately return to the guard and demand a reward. Vance rejected the idea, calling it unworkable. He walked forward, urging the girls to keep up. Without further ado, they all followed the hero. At some point, Vance led them to the grieving hanged man. Seeing the figure in the darkness, Vance became wary, and the ghost himself thanked the company for arriving. With a shriek, her empty eye sockets stared at the raiding party. Immediately, a strong wind blew. He in turn awakened the dead that lay underground. The situation was difficult, and then Vance thrust his sword into the ground. Trying to harm the undead, he directed spiritual energy there, after which he rushed forward towards the hanged man. However, his swing of his sword at the evil spirit ended in a miss. To his shock, the undead simply disappeared. Having teleported, she was now sitting on the hero's shoulders. Unexpectedly, she began to persuade Vance to copulate and create a new class. And not wanting to hear about such things, the hero waved his hand. Ghost was genuinely upset that Vance didn't want anything like that. For refusing such an attractive offer, the undead sentenced the hero to death. The next moment it took off, threatening to swallow the soul. Her hair flew up and thorns began to emerge from the ground. With a few turns around himself, Vance destroyed those. Then, he advised the girls not to waste time and move on. Lawana nodded, preparing her magic staff. Minz jingled her sword, promising to help in the fight. Now the matter affected the rest of the raid participants, who had previously always been somewhere behind. They were finally given the important role of supporting and covering the rear. Afterwards, every single one of them was ready to join the fight. Following closely behind Vance, the team fought their way through the undead manifestations. But the undead were not going to let them go easily. One of the girls rushed out to meet the new manifestation. Having attacked, she asked her allies to provide urgent assistance. On the other hand, Vance was already approaching. Moving quickly, he raised his sword in advance. Seeing the threat, the undead extended their hands towards the sword. At that moment, her hair became very tightly entwined with the weapon. The situation turned out to be a stalemate. But then Minz intervened in time. Vance released his weapon and continued his swing. With a whistle, his blade cut through the air, and the ghost that was there. At this point, the battle ended, and the team could breathe a sigh of relief. For many of them, this was the first such experience in their lives. The hero's special talent worked again, and after the undead were destroyed, a pile of loot remained on the ground. The girls were very grateful to Vance, so they donated all the loot they received to him. Having thanked them, the hero took all the rewards for himself. Having quickly examined the objects there, he urged the raid participants to continue on their way. The group moved on, and the overall progress of the dungeon was almost complete. At a certain point along the way, a figure appeared in the distance. The girls were delighted, thinking that it was their familiar guard standing there. Grabbing Minz by the hand, the hero rudely stopped her. Vance began to explain that simply approaching the figure would only result in death. Gradually, it began to dawn on the girls that the Guardian could be the boss of the entire dungeon. Indirectly, Vance confirmed their suspicions. Lawana spoke up, completely failing to understand the logic, as the boss himself had previously given the quest. Then Vance had to explain that this was exactly how the dungeon trap worked. The boss deliberately fooled the other players, whom he then easily destroyed. Following this, the guard's vile laughter was heard. But before attacking, he demanded that he give back the things he had found belonging to his wife. He reminded that he was ready to exchange them for special items. The next moment, the guard's body twisted and his face twisted in pain. Suddenly, Vance attacked him and dealt him several blows with his sword. The hero acted in advance, because in a past life he had already been deceived by a dead man. A second later, the guard straightened his shoulders. Suddenly, his body began to undergo changes. His decrepit limbs were replaced by new, more massive ones. Now he appeared in his true form, as a ghostly king. On his own behalf, he sentenced the raid participants to death. After which, he swung his staff and hit the ground with a loud thud. Vile dark magic began to spread throughout the area. She materialized, taking the form of countless hordes of crows. Vance tried to get rid of those with sword swings. He could not cope alone, and therefore he called on his allies for help. One of the girls opened her spiritual umbrella, preparing to use mass destruction magic. Thus, the raid participants entered into a new confrontation. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the hero decided to directly harm the boss himself. Vance moved behind him and was about to deliver a critical blow. Now Vance was the only one who knew that mages couldn't really stand up to close combat. Having secretly gotten close enough, Vance carried out a series of blows to the boss's back. A fair amount of damage was dealt, causing the undead to howl. There was a knock of a staff, and the boss disappeared into a caustic fog. The hero felt that the boss's position had changed somewhere behind his back. While the boss's abilities were still down, Vance called on the entire group to attack together. The hero himself used an explosive jab. Loana released the sacred flame. The other girls used their strengths in their classes. Together, they caused significant damage to the boss, but the general attack was not enough to destroy him immediately. Then, Vance raised his sword, calling upon the powers of the sky and the stars for help. Following his call, something began to flash en masse high in the sky. Not even a minute had passed before the summoned daggers began to rain down on the boss. As for finishing off the already exhausted boss, Vance left that to his pet. The next action he took was to throw the animal towards the boss. Spinning, the Iron Eater flew past the enchanted girls. Once close enough, the animal let out a loud roar. With this sound vibration, he literally tore the boss apart. The boss was eliminated, and the little animal proudly descended to the ground. The girls immediately ran up to him and began to bother the cutie in every possible way. At the same time, the hero approached the boss's tombstone. What he saw left Vance unpleasantly surprised. All the loot that remained from the boss was intended exclusively for the mage class. Of all the items there, only the precious stone could be of any use to Vance. In any case, the boss was defeated, and the difficult raid came to an end. Soon Loana approached Vance, who had no intention of letting him go empty-handed. The hero refused, because he never received the required loot from the raid. Taking with him only the precious stone, he considered his obligations complete. At the same time, he asked the girls not to waste time, because they would become the first guild to complete this raid. The hero left, leaving the girls in a slight but pleasant confusion regarding his manners. No longer within the raid, Vance contacted someone. Looking around, he was going to fool this man. Soon, Hao's appearance appeared on the communication screen. A meeting was scheduled, which took place the very next day. In the restaurant, while eating, Vance was talking with the guild leader. Gradually, the conversation turned to the situation with the girl, and Hao was not offended, because he understood everything. The hero continued to play his role beautifully, ashamed of breaking his word. Knowing about Vance's success, Hao hoped that he would one day help his guild. However, after hearing this, Vance's expression changed dramatically. Sighing, the hero started talking about his imaginary girlfriend, who would be against helping the Hao guild. Poor Hao's breath caught in his throat, as he had not expected such feminine treachery. Vance continued his speech, feeling an obligation to Hao he was ready to sell him the walkthrough. Moreover, Vance did not demand a huge payment from the guild leader. At first, Hao jumped up from his seat, but then, with a feeling of anger, he gave his consent. The deal was made, and the hero began writing the instructions. Vance did all this to maintain the secrecy of the method for passing the dungeon. The hero also asked Hao himself to protect the information. Hao thanked Vance and they said goodbye. The hero looked after him with satisfaction, knowing that Hao simply did not have enough strength to go through the dungeon now. Evening came and the scene changed. Vance was on his way to one of the local establishments. There inside, having found the owner, he threw her a bag of money. It is unclear why, but the hero wanted to buy up all the elixirs against poison. The owner was not averse to making a deal, but warned the hero that her goods were not cheap. Afterwards, she jumped down to the counter. She looked into the money bag with extreme interest. Vance could easily have given a larger sum, but the owner said that this was enough. And in general, the hostess liked how easily Vance could get hold of spiritual stones. Coming closer, she began to seduce the hero into opening a joint business. Her whole appearance showed that she was ready to give Vance not only the goods, but even herself. The hero gulped, not expecting to encounter such gameplay in the game. Gathering all his willpower, he refused such an offer. All this did not come easy to Vance, who literally had to fight against his inner urges. In the end, the idea of becoming the strongest swordsman prevailed. The owner pinched Vance on the butt and sighed, announcing that she would go collect the goods. The hero was overcome with tremors, but even if he had changed his mind, he would no longer have been able to do anything. A few minutes later, Vance was leaving the store, sweating. The hero himself did not buy the poison just like that, but planned to sell it, thereby becoming rich. Moreover, Vance has already come up with an enticing slogan. Everyone was in danger along the way, which meant everyone needed elixirs. The hero's next step was to go in search of materials. After some time, events moved to a particularly hot location. Just from being there, Vance was already taking damage on a constant basis. The hero didn't even have time to move forward much before something was already crawling towards him underground. Another moment and the terrible creature emerged from under the layers of soil. Vance reacted quickly and swung his sword. Just one hit and the monster lost its claws. With a back kick, Vance pushed the monster aside. Wounded, the monster hit the mountain walls hard. Then it suddenly jumped up and squealed and began to run away. Vance could not allow this to happen. Rushing to catch up with the monster, at some point he threw a sword at it. Pierced by the blade, the monster fell to the ground. When it dissolved, it left behind some loot. Vance sorted through the treasures, but their quality was insufficient. In any case, he took loot, at least for sale. Having reached a certain point in the location, he suddenly began to call someone. Soon, a lush tail appeared in the middle of the hot stones. Then, a graceful creature appeared. The firefox was angry at the way Vance treated her. Laughing, the hero repeated his offensive words. Then, enraged, the fox unleashed the power of her fiery tail on the hero. Flaming drops began to burn the location, which Vance was easily dodging for now. The fox bared her teeth, because Vance turned out to be a difficult opponent. The hero continued his mockery, this time mentioning the fox's bad manners. Subsequently, the hero himself went on the attack. The fox crossed her arms over her chest and was about to fight back. Swinging them in time, she sent red-hot boomerangs towards Vance. The hero used a defensive technique, starting to beat them with his hands, feet, and even the sword itself. Following which, Vance returned the boomerangs back to the fox. She didn't have time to react. Having received damage, she fell to the ground. However, she did not die as soon as she woke up. She turned into a real fox. In response, Vance took out his pet. Then he swung it hard. He threw the Iron Eater towards the fox, having already called it prey. In flight, the Iron Eater opened its mouth, drooling. It was anticipating a meal. In just one moment, the Iron Eater swallowed the fox. However, he did not look full, complaining that he had not eaten anything for a very long time. In any case, for the victory, the hero was gifted with a special firepower. But then, during the gaming session, Vance's phone started ringing. The hero interrupted the simulation as quickly as possible, after which he hurried to answer the call. A friend of his called him and asked the hero for help. Vance didn't mind helping, and besides, the gym boss was now going to live with him. He even imagined how, with her help, he would quickly gain sufficient physical fitness. In this way, Vance intended to prepare for the time when the game and the real world would intertwine. The hero sighed sadly, because if this event happened, the world would plunge into a long period of chaos and wars. Having dressed quickly, he left the house. Soon he met Lan. As it turned out, she was deliberately moving towards the hero. But since Vance had shown up, she didn't want to bother with her luggage anymore. The girls were in a hurry to play, which Vance took with understanding. As soon as the hero placed his hand on Lan's luggage, he was overcome with confusion. No matter how hard Vance tried, the luggage wouldn't budge due to its weight. A little later somehow, the hero dragged the luggage to his home. Lan thanked Vance for his help, then cheerfully jumped into the gaming chair. Vance approached and began to explain exactly how to interact with virtual reality. With his guidance, the girl completed the first stages very quickly. A minute later, she was already in the game world. Like everyone before her, Nuva met the new player there. Seeing her dignified behavior, Nuva blessed the new player. Thus, Lan acquired her first gaming talent. However, for the girl herself, the name of the talent meant nothing at all. Without receiving any explanation, Nuva suggested that she choose a spawn location. Lan began to peer into the proposed places. It was then that Vance appeared and began to give recommendations. Lan didn't recognize her friend at first, but eventually admitted that the outfit suited him. After which, she demonstrated to the hero what kind of talent she had. Vance almost had a fit of hysterics, because such a talent for a knight was incredibly rare. Lan herself didn't understand her luck, so she began to adjust her class. The hero was generally happy for her, because Lan could stand up for herself. Next, Vance took charge of her. First of all, the hero took Lan to the city in order to buy her some equipment. Vance led her to the very center of the market square. Players were scurrying around everywhere, often looking for special items. Vance deliberately attracted the attention of some of them. The hero made it clear that he had what was needed for those goods. Pretty soon, news about the merchant spread throughout the area. Literally every one of them wanted to buy an antidote to the poison. People were shouting everywhere until someone called Vance's name. The gorgeous beauty devoured the hero with her gaze. In fact, she was trying to seduce Vance in order to manipulate him further. However, the hero was no slouch and understood everything perfectly. The beauty looked into her eyes. She was a little offended that Vance was cold towards her. The other players had already guessed that both characters were not indifferent. But then Lan made herself known, pinching Vance, reminding him of the seductive person's betrayal. Taking the hero by the hand, Hagen kept trying to master him. She was even offended that Vance was playing with Lan for some reason. At that moment, a strong hand grabbed Vance's neck. Lan pressed him to her chest, calling the hero almost a pet. Vance was overjoyed to feel the tenderness and pleasant scent of a woman's body for the first time. Hagen was angry, for she had no intention of letting Vance go so easily. Then, the fact of the separation was confirmed by Vance himself. Hagen was indignant again, especially without understanding why. Taking a breath, Vance revealed that he knew about Hagen's affairs. The girl looked down and tried to justify herself. Not wanting to listen to lies any longer, the hero even provided evidence of betrayal. After which he hugged Lan, calling her his bride. Lan played along with Vance and asked her rival to disappear. Then the crowd's shouts were heard, driving Hagen away so that she would not interfere with trade. Hagen chuckled and clenched her teeth, promising that she would return for revenge. Many hours passed and evening came. Vance was done trading for the day, but he felt completely tired. He handed over one of the bags with the proceeds to Lan, so that she could begin her path of leveling up there. As for Vance himself, he was going to find a more efficient way to make money. The hero already had a plan to buy the land and open his own business on it. Moreover, time was on Vance's side for now. At some point, a sense of danger came over the hero. He looked back, seeing a growling wolf on the hill. Vance looked at the wolf and chuckled mysteriously. Then he quickly drew his sword, deciding to finish off the beast. The wolf in turn rushed towards Vance. Pointing the tip of his sword, the hero advanced in response. In a moment, his weapon pierced the beast. Immediately, Vance began to call for help. Princess Tongue ran out from somewhere in the thicket of the forest. Crying, she begged the hero to help. The hero frowned, because he knew something about the game's plot related to the princess. Having barely caught her breath, the princess began to tell how her retinue was attacked by demons. The hero stopped his story because he didn't need details. Moreover, strange people in cloaks appeared from the forest. They did not ask for the princess to be handed over, but only urged Vance to prepare for death. The hero grinned and accepted the challenge. Then, clutching the amulet in his hand, Vance called upon the powers of thunder and lightning to help. The demon worshippers were frightened by his power. But what was even more frightening for them was that the Sword Guild mentor suddenly appeared. As it turned out, by using the amulet, Vance called the head of the guild for help. At the sight of her, the demon worshippers retreated back. The head of the guild waved her hand, wanting to teach the impudent ones a lesson. A shockwave appeared that began to tear the villains to shreds. The hero couldn't help but be delighted at how easily the guild leader dealt with them. Suddenly, the head of the guild turned her attention to Vance, annoyed that he had not visited her for a long time. Frightened, Vance declared that he would definitely make up for lost time. Having accepted his words, the head of the guild handed the hero a new talisman. Then, under the flashes of lightning, it evaporated. After her, Tongue spoke up, saying she was grateful for her rescue. The hero did not ask for gratitude, while noting how much his reputation had risen. Modesty pleased Tongue, and Vance's reputation grew again. Vance continued to shower her with great speeches about selflessness. It goes without saying that the princess enjoyed all of this quite a bit. At some point, she even invited Vance into her kingdom. Having been there, the hero noted how majestic everything around looked. At some point, a figure appeared who was interested in the princess's health. He was the third prince of the local dynasty. Toon was very glad to see that. Vance bowed, introducing himself as the princess's savior. The prince was grateful and even ready to give the hero a gift. Not one to miss the opportunity, Vance asked for land as a reward. Laughing, the prince threw the deed of gift to the hero. Having caught her, Vance thanked her for the gift. A little later, he arrived at the place that was given by the prince. The hero was happy, because he received not only the land, but even the buildings on it. Moreover, Vance's plot was located right in the center of the city. At some point, women's calls interrupted Vance's thoughts. From the building opposite, charming ladies invited the hero to relax. The hero grinned and winked at them. The ladies there were delighted with his reaction and manners. Finally, Vance entered the building. There the hero was greeted by servants. By bowing, they confirmed that they had already read the imperial decree. In this regard, the servants promised that they would help Vance in every possible way. Moreover, he committed himself to taking on the development of the shop. Nodding, Vance found their vows worthy. Along the way, the hero was also given the store's ledger. Having read the previous name of the shop on it, Vance came up with his own, which even knocked the servants off their feet. A little later, the hero explained to the servants how things would be done. The main point to note is that the shop should not go bankrupt. In pursuing his plan, Vance intended to actively manipulate supply and demand. Half an hour later, crowds of players were already rushing towards his pharmacy. Hours passed since then and the day was drawing to a close. Before night fell, Vance returned to his guild. The guild leader studied him with her gaze. Vance bowed and apologized for his delay. The head of the guild hoped that the hero would receive a reward for saving the princess. Taking the hint, the hero assured that he would not dare betray the guild and go into someone else's service. Then, the head of the guild began to lure Vance to her. Suddenly, an unknown force grabbed the hero by the edges of his clothes. Pulling Vance closer, the head of the guild wanted to make sure that he was not lying. The hero again began to assure his honesty, and at the same time presented a gift. He also used beautiful words to emphasize his importance. With the tacit consent of the guild leader, he put the decoration on her. The guild leader remained silent, embarrassed, but the system noted that his favor had increased. Vance was pleased with himself and the method of manipulation he had chosen. As soon as his lips touched the guild leader's hand, she called out to Vance. Quickly rejecting her, Vance began to talk her down. She looked away, calling the hero a sycophant. Subsequently, their conversation turned to materials for cultivation. Fortunately, Vance had already obtained everything he needed. A little later, on the instructions of the guild leader, the hero began to meditate. Through cultivation, Vance improved the quality of his skills. The process was so long that even the weather in the game world had time to change. Disturbance swarmed among the storm clouds. The head of the guild drew attention to this. By projecting a barrier around Vance, she protected him from the lightning. Vance saw what had happened and was pleased with his defense. Now, even with all the desire, it would be difficult to offend the hero. But these dreams were suddenly interrupted by the head of the guild herself. The unfortunate Vance was twisted by this news. Afterwards, he wanted to know the reason with all his bitterness. The guild leader began to explain the monstrous power of lightning during Vance's meditations. She assumed that once Vance became strong enough, he would no longer need her. Moreover, the chance of failure in development did not leave the hero. Still, she urged Vance not to lose heart. After all, he had a chance to pass the tests without outside help. Afterwards, naming the Thunderlands as a place for pumping. The hero perked up, as he had completely forgotten about such a location before. Having bowed, he decided to urgently go to this location. Unexpectedly, the guild leader gently touched Vance. She asked the hero to be careful, because there were many bad people living in those lands, immediately shocking Vance with the news that the hero will be left without support. Falling to his knees, Vance felt vulnerable for the first time. After some time, the hero arrived in the Thunderlands. Every now and then, Vance put on a brave face, proving to himself that he could defend himself. This feeling lasted until lightning struck near Vance. As quickly as possible, the hero opened the umbrella. The umbrella was the hero's only protection from lightning. It was a gift from the head of the guild, who could no longer protect the hero. Then, bowing and thanking, Vance assured that he would repay with kindness. His sweet words once again embarrassed the sultry woman. Driven by these memories, Vance rushed forward. However, Vance was not moving in a random direction. He was looking for the god of thunder himself, who was in charge of everything here. At some point, in the midst of the rain and puddles, his mouth appeared. In response, Vance deployed his pet. Just one cast and a large portion of the boss's health was taken away. Iron Eater did not stop, eventually finishing off the dragon. Vance was extremely pleased with the effectiveness of his pet. However, the hero himself was going to deal the final blow to the boss. After which, having approached, he inflicted critical damage. Finally, the dragon was defeated. Moreover, an Iron Eater immediately began to gnaw on his carcass. For the most part, the loot dropped by the dragon didn't really make Vance happy. Suddenly, the system notified the player that special items had been added to the inventory. While the hero was studying the objects, someone secretly approached him. A second later, Vance turned his attention to the strange sounds coming from the side. 2 girls demanded from the hero special eggs that fell from the dragon. However, Vance was not in the mood to give anyone gifts. Knowing that they couldn't cope on their own, the girls threatened to call for reinforcements. The hero laughed, not believing the threats at all. In response, one of the girls summoned a bow. The girls called themselves members of a demon sect and did not want to waste time on conversations. In the world of the game, sects and guilds were commonplace. They were divided according to their quality, from the weakest to the strongest. Compared to Vance's guild, the demon sect was much more powerful. All this made the hero think hard about the consequences. Not wanting to start a war, he decided to part with the eggs. The girls burst out laughing, calling the hero's choice correct. Only now, one of them noticed the chomping animal. They wished that Vance would part with his pet as well. Vance could never forgive such impudence. As soon as the hero reached for his sword, an arrow was fired in his direction. With one swing, Vance cut it down, after which he approached each of the girls. Immediately, the hero delivered 2 firm thrusts. By pressing on a special area, he deprived the girls of the ability to move. However, Vance did not intend to achieve more. In order to avoid being stabbed in the back, he tied up the girls first. Now, taking advantage of their desperate situation, Vance wanted to teach the impudent girls a lesson. Subsequently, having begun to tickle those, through their laughter, the girls begged the hero to let them go. The girls swore that after their release they would not snitch. Without thinking twice, Vance cut the ropes. As soon as they were freed, the girls began to run away and laugh at Vance's gullibility. Immediately after this, releasing a signal flare into the sky, their arrogant behavior ceased with the penetration of the sword. Out of anger, Vance stabbed one of them. The second, calling the hero every name for the murder, was going to take revenge. Using telekinesis, she picked up a nearby boulder. But because of the swing of Vance's sword, she was unable to do anything. After spinning around, Vance slashed with his sword again. The girl's body staggered, spitting blood. Subsequently, she fell in front of her friend. Vance didn't regret what he had done at all, because the girls hadn't kept their word. While there was still time, the hero decided to leave the area as quickly as possible. After half an hour, circles began to spread across the surrounding waters. The sect master has arrived at this location. It didn't take him long to find the students. The young master was dissatisfied with their deaths and ordered that the bodies be disposed of. However, he wanted to find out why he dared to attack the sect member. The master was so angry that he was going to rip the skin off the impudent fellow. The hero remembered a lot about Valor, who was destined to play the role of a villain in the future. Therefore, Vance had to be very careful. He was constantly upset that at such a difficult time, the head of the guild could not support him. At that very moment, in another part of the game world, a sneeze was heard. Then the head of the guild sneezed, because someone remembered her. Suddenly, a servant appeared behind her with a basket. She brought the ingredients that the guild leader so desperately needed. The head of the guild was pleased that they managed to get everything they needed. In her wet dreams, she imagined herself treating Vance to cooking. But first and foremost, she did it to increase the hero's chances of survival. The events shifted again, this time to the place where the fire was burning. Slowly, Vance entered into his tongue. The Cerberus came out to meet him, shaking the earth. Vance had a very difficult fight ahead of him. However, he was not afraid, knowing that for victory, he would be able to receive a valuable reward. The next moment, he used magic. Cutting through the air, she hit 2 of the Cerberus's heads at once. But this was not enough to defeat the sacred beast. Immediately, the hero began to call upon the power of the phoenix. His sword grew hot, then with a swing, it emitted a ripple of fire. In flight, she began to spin, not allowing anyone to really dodge her, ultimately hitting the Cerberus with all his might. Having received significant damage, the beast's body was thrown back. A special monster was defeated, and all the players on the server immediately found out about it. Meanwhile, Vance approached the defeated beast. This time, the hero was lucky and received valuable material as loot. While rummaging through the treasures, the hero managed to find some decent boots among them. Other things also managed to please Vance. The hero planned to sell everything else that could not be useful. At some point, Vance felt footsteps, and therefore, as quickly as possible, he left his previous place of residence. Soon, Valor appeared among the students. Looking around, he quickly came to the conclusion that a boss had been defeated here quite recently. A minute later, he found the remains of the carcass. Next, he began to look closely at the remains of Cerberus. Valor came to the conclusion that whoever defeated the beast could most likely deal with its students as well. At the same time, Vance landed nearby. Despite the danger behind him, the hero did not give up trying to find another dragon. Subsequently, the hero's attention was again distracted. A little further away, someone was fighting with someone. One of the participants in the fight was quickly defeated. It was a conflict based on lies and betrayal, but even lying on the ground, the loser promised that the traitor would get what he deserved. He was not afraid of the consequences, because once killed, the girl would not tell anyone anything. Suddenly Vance appeared, enjoying the intensity of the situation. For some reason, the hero suddenly decided to stand up for the girl. The traitor laughed. Not considering Vance a worthy threat, he accepted his challenge. The next action was to use destructive magic, which destroyed half of the slope. A second later, his eyes flinched. Vance was unharmed, landing neatly on the traitor's hand. Enraged, he tried to throw Vance off of him. But as soon as he managed to do anything, the hero disappeared without a trace. Growling with indignation, the traitor began to chop everything around, just to make Vance stop hiding. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find Vance. Meanwhile, the hero himself, having picked up the girl, flew away somewhere. Almost without strength, she looked at her savior, finding him very handsome. During the flight, the hero found a secluded place where he wanted to hide with the rescued one. Vance hoped that the traitor would not be able to find the escapees. A little later, having come to her senses a little, the girl actively thanked Vance for saving her. However, she had no idea why the hero had gotten himself into this whole situation. In response, Vance began to boast about following the path of righteousness. His words and even his manners melted the girl's heart. A system window with reputation appeared, and it turned out that she was an NPC. A little later, the embarrassed girl introduced herself as Fan. The hero remembered that in his past life, it was Fan who saved the city of people from the invasion of demons. At the moment of the merging of the worlds, Fan happened to be nearby by chance. And yet, seeing the trouble, she rushed to help without hesitation. Later, Fan actively fought on the side of humanity. However, first and foremost, she was a healer, and therefore she often saved people rather than participating in direct clashes. The first battle then turned into pure hell. Both monsters and people suffered colossal losses. When it was all over, Fan was miraculously found among a pile of bodies. The unfortunate woman was barely alive and was badly injured. Years later, an entire monument was erected in her honor. Having finished remembering, the hero could not understand why Fan was already in danger. Suddenly, the rescued girl handed Vance a letter. Taking it in his hands, the hero slowly opened the envelope. The letter contained an offer to join the Fang sect, to which Vance could not give an answer. And therefore, with the utmost respect, the hero refused. Fan sighed, but accepted the refusal without offense. Afterwards, she began to tell that she went with another person from the sect to track down the dragon. Vance never expected the lizard to become so popular. Unlike Fan, who was looking for ingredients for medicine, Vance hoped to obtain a dragon's heart. The revelation excited Fan, who suggested joining forces. Vance agreed, but warned the girl about the dangers lurking around. Looking down, Fan nodded understandingly. She then revealed that another disciple had betrayed their sect in order to offer the dragon to Valor. The traitor wanted to get rid of the girl as a witness. The hero wondered why the demon worshippers were looking for the dragon so much. Fan hinted to the hero that the forces of evil were strengthening their powers. The whole night passed with these conversations. Vance greeted the morning in the warm rays of the sun. Fan was nearby, who enjoyed Vance's company, and who didn't try to pester her the whole night. The hero laughed to himself, because he knew how quickly his reputation with the girl was growing. This romantic scene was interrupted as the back wall of the cave began to shake. Sensing something was wrong, Vance grabbed Fan's hand and pulled her along. He barely made it in time, because a moment later, the ferocious pig destroyed the cave. The boar squealed throughout the area, continuing to destroy nearby objects. The hero knew something about this beast, which was the second most powerful in the entire location. Unexpectedly, Fan volunteered to cover for Vance. Snatching up the club, she jumped up and immediately rushed down. With all her might, Fan hit the boar on the back of the neck. The hero himself tried to come to his senses. He could not shake the feeling that what was happening was not accidental. Due to the noise made by the boar, the character's position was revealed. The traitor quickly realized that this was where the fugitive was. So, as soon as possible, he arrived at the location of Vance and Fan. Fan never expected to meet the traitor so quickly. Afterwards, she turned to Vance, urging him to escape. Vance was confused, because in fact, the girl was an extremely modest fighter. But further battle did not take place, because the sky opened up. Seeing the dragon writhing among the clouds, Vance no longer had a reason to run away. Drawing his sword, he intended to deal with each problem separately. At the same time, the boar finally saw the great dragon. In horror, he screamed and started running away. Vance wasn't too pleased that the formidable boar had given up so easily. The boar was so scared that he ended up flying into a tree. Fan even shuddered, seeing how absurdly the mighty beast had destroyed itself. The strange and unpredictable events did not end there, however. Fan sensed the aura of those approaching, calling them ominous creatures. Suddenly, the traitor burst into loud laughter. His laughter stopped as soon as he noticed that the characters had disappeared without a trace. Once again, his victims disappeared somewhere. A couple of seconds later, Valor showed up with his retinue. The traitor bowed to him, announcing that he had met the dragon. With a grin, Valor turned his gaze to the sky. After which, he summoned sparkling chaos magic. With a quick movement, he released magic straight at the dragon. The great creature roared in unbearable pain. Vance watched all this from the side, using his stealth skills. Fearing the prospect of meeting the demon worshippers, Fan didn't know what to do. After thinking for a moment, Vance sent the girl to a safe place. However, Fan had no intention of abandoning the hero. Vance felt embarrassed by her look and words, but still admitted that he could not allow Fan to die. And so, he handed Fan his umbrella, asking her to take care of it in the event of his death. The hero sighed heavily, apparently. He would have to start a war. At the same time, Fan hoped to meet the hero alive and well. As she ran away, she almost cried because of how noble the hero appeared in her eyes. Meanwhile, the Thunder Dragon was already writhing on the ground. The hero watched how easily Valor could bully an entire boss. At some point in time, Valor stopped burning the dragon with lightning. Having played enough, he summoned a spear to finish off the boss. The next moment, he delivered the fatal blow. The crunch of bones was heard and blood flowed like a river. Valor burst out laughing. The boss seemed so insignificant to him. Suddenly, a traitor spoke up, wanting to curry favor and personally get the dragon's heart. Valor was not averse to shifting the dirty work onto someone else. At that very moment, the sound of a horn was heard, blown by Vance. Thus, temporarily, Vance forced nearby monsters to fight on his side. Of course, the demon worshippers heard the howl of the horn. Among them, only Valor guessed what all this could mean. After all, very soon, a horde of all sorts of creatures appeared on the horizon. As if maddened, they rushed towards the demon worshippers. Valor was not afraid of the sight of them, ordering them to deal with the creatures. Meanwhile, the traitor tried to find out where the dragon's thunderheart was. Suddenly, a frog jumped out of a nearby puddle. Croaking, she flew straight towards the traitor. In the end, sitting right on his face. During this distraction, Vance managed to get to the dragon's heart. One precise movement and the heart is in the hero's hands. The taste of victory made Vance almost laugh maliciously. After a couple of seconds, the traitor finally managed to drive the frog away. For some time he held on to his eyes, which the frog was trying to deprive him of. Only then did he realize how wrong he had been. Moreover, Valor appeared, who wanted to get his heart. Almost stuttering, the traitor began to explain that everything was lost. In response, Valor pointed his hand towards the traitor. In an instant, he pulled him towards himself. Valor believed that the traitor was prevaricating, trying to take the loot for himself. Wanting to take back what was his, Valor began to torture the traitor. Covered in bruises, Valor claimed he was innocent. Immediately after this was said, the hero's secrecy ceased to work, and therefore, he became visible to everyone. At some point, Vance felt that the secret had been revealed. The traitor quickly pointed at Vance, calling him a thief. The hero smiled in response, but had no intention of staying for the showdown. As quickly as possible, Vance mounted his sword. With each passing moment, he rose higher and higher. Valor bared his teeth and called upon the dark forces to help him. His cloak straightened out and he flew after the hero. Stubbornly following Vance, he promised mercy if he got the heart back. The hero, of course, didn't believe it, and the electric shock hit straight into the sword. Somehow in the air, Vance managed to group himself. He was eager to get to the teleport as quickly as possible. In this way, the hero could have been saved. At a certain point, Vance showed up at full speed in the city, where Fan was waiting for him. She immediately waved her hand at Vance. Suddenly, she saw Valor chasing after him. Anger showed on her face at the sight of the vile Valor. In order to help the hero, Fan used a blessing. Immediately, Vance's stats increased many times over. Next, he stopped next to Fan. Under the influence of the blessing, the hero drew his sword. Then, he waved it and released a stream of frost. Although it did no damage, it froze Valor for a very short time. Taking advantage of the time, he grabbed Fan's hand. Together, they ran to the teleport. The process of preparing for the move began immediately. At that very moment, Valor emerged from the ice trap. Summoning his spear, he aimed it at Vance, just to prevent him from escaping. Having completed his preparations, Valor threw the spear. Cutting through the air, it approached very, very quickly. Both characters panicked as they found themselves in a hopeless situation. But fortunately, just before the spear hit, the teleportation process took place. It was followed by an explosion, raising a thick cloud of smoke. When everything had cleared, Only a crater remained at the site of the teleportation device. Valor chuckled, knowing that the victims had managed to escape. Slowly, he pulled his hood over himself. Nevertheless, he promised to get even with Vance for the theft he had committed. A moment later, in a different location, Vance and Fan were thrown out of the teleporter. The hero was sincerely glad that he managed to survive. Then, immediately, he called on everyone to return to their own. Vance feared that Valor's spies might be in every major sect and guild. Even though she didn't really want to, Fan agreed to break up. Vance himself felt awkward letting her go, because the hero liked the way women looked at him. A couple of hours later, Vance visited his guild. He really hoped that the mentor missed him. However, the hero was not greeted with much enthusiasm. At least, that's what it seemed to Vance at first. Looking closer, he saw a smile on the guild leader's face for the first time. Without wasting any time, Vance demonstrated the ingredient he had obtained. After looking at the dragon's heart, the mentor decided to find out if Vance was the only one who killed the boss. The hero was embarrassed to tell the truth, which the mentor did not really require. Eventually, Vance decided to admit that he had stolen the heart. Not understanding anything, the head of the guild asked again. Finally, waving her hand, she asked Vance to follow her. The hero readily agreed. Already in the mentor's chambers, Vance told the story in full. With her whole appearance, the mentor made it clear that she was somewhat jealous of the hero towards other women. Vance assured that his heart belonged only to the head of the guild. Then, the mentor asked the hero one provocative question. Vance gave the answer without hesitation, and she believed him. In any case, Vance asked him to let him go because the hero was quite tired. However, the head of the guild ordered the hero to stay, because she wanted to take care of him. Vance breathlessly imagined himself taking a bath with his mentor. But the reality turned out to be not so tempting. Even though it was in someone else's bathroom, the hero had to wash himself. Later, Vance was a little sad that his fantasies still did not come true. However, the hero drowned out all these emotions with the pleasure of a hot bath. Every now and then, Vance would make a moaning sound, symbolizing pleasure. The sounds he made profusely confused the head of the guild to a certain extent. Unable to bear to listen to this any longer, she asked Vance to finish washing quickly. Moreover, she promised some kind of surprise for the hero. Vance took his time, enjoying the bath and the medicinal herbs in it to the fullest. But then the hero came to his senses, because sitting in a stat-boosting bath for a long time could turn into a disaster. Without realizing it, Vance could have brought a thunderstorm down on his head. And then, straightening his shoulders, Vance stretched his arms out to the sides. He bared his chest, in which beat the stolen dragon's heart. With his help, lightning was unable to strike the hero. During this process, the teacher entered the bathroom. Without further ado, she began to step into Vance's tub. As she approached, she made it clear that the hero should not make a sound. Afterwards, her lips touched Vance's lips firmly. Perhaps everything that followed was a dream from which the hero woke up. He jumped out of bed abruptly, seeing the head of the guild in front of him. She pretended to be incomprehensible, as if Vance had imagined what had happened. But what remained true was the rise of the hero's spiritual powers. And with this, the head of the guild sincerely congratulated the hero. Laughing, Vance thanked his mentor for all the support she had given him. Smiling, the mentor urged Vance to follow her, as a gift awaited him. As quickly as possible, the hero left his bed. He immediately discovered that he was completely naked. About a minute later, having dressed, he managed to catch up with the head of the guild. The hero already imagined that he would be given something truly unique. However, the head of the guild took him to a table set with all kinds of food. Vance took a quick look at the food there. It was immediately clear that something was wrong with the food there, and therefore, the hero decided to pretend that he wouldn't notice anything. The guild leader stopped Vance, pointing to the food, which she called the expected surprise. Hearing this, the hero asked his mentor again, just in case. Next, he glanced again at the food, which did not inspire any confidence. The teacher nodded and invited Vance to taste what she had prepared. The hero was confused, especially regarding the edibility of what he saw. Sitting down on the chair, Vance found himself in a difficult situation of choice. Before eating, he decided to find out what strange dishes he saw in front of him. Having learned about pork in the Special Union, the hero carefully took a piece of meat. Exhaling, he began to bring the piece of meat to his mouth. His teeth clenched and Vance began to chew vigorously. The emotions on the hero's face changed rapidly, mostly radiating terrible disgust. Despite the disgusting nature of the dish, he called the guild leader's cooking divine. The guild leader appreciated Vance's words and offered him to eat everything. Subsequently, not intending to offend her, Vance placed a bunch of debuffs on himself. The guild leader really liked how Vance got carried away, asking him to try more and more dishes. At some point, it was the turn of the half-decomposed fish. The head of the guild insisted on trying the fish. Supposedly it could help Vance recover after his travels. Joyfully, she poured a huge mass of this misunderstanding into the hero's plate. Vance was horrified, because the fish had an ominous aura about it. Just for the sake of the guild leader, he agreed to eat her. Afterwards, pouring the strange fish into his mouth. For the first time, the hero felt that the dish was not disgusting. On the other hand, the world began to swim before his eyes. The next moment, due to the effect of the poison, Vance lost consciousness. Later, having come to his senses, the hero wondered whether the poison had been removed from the fish. Covering her mouth, the guild leader remembered that she had done nothing of the sort. Vance was starting to feel sick again. It was doubly worse for him because the mentor was so inattentive. Now, all that was left for the guild leader to do was ask the hero for forgiveness. Pressing him to her chest, she promised to treat Vance again in the future. But all this will be in the future, because the head of the guild had some plans. After all, she was planning to go into seclusion in order to gain new knowledge. Vance was sad that his mentor was leaving him. Such words touched the heart of the guild leader. Embarrassed, she explained that she had not abandoned the hero. However, Vance wanted to make sure of all this. So, the mentor had to assure the hero of her honesty. Since the decision could not be changed, Vance asked her to be careful. With a trembling voice, the teacher promised this. Then, letting go of Vance, she walked away. Despite everything he had experienced, the hero felt happy, as he had become even closer to the head of the guild. Moreover, Vance was only a short time away from intimacy with her. Before entering deep meditation, the guild leader gave Vance some instructions. In particular, she asked the hero to calm his masculine side. Vance promised that he would not think about anyone but his mentor. Having accepted these words, she went to her chambers. But at some point her gait slowed down and she stopped. As a final favor, she donated artifacts to Vance. The hero sincerely thanked his mentor. Besides, Vance had assignments. First of all, Vance was asked to go to a feast. The second task required Vance to find the guild's branch. The mentor wanted to know why contact with the branch had been lost. The mentor hinted that the second task could be fraught with danger. After all that had been said, the guild leader was finally able to have some privacy. Vance himself knew something about what was to come, but for some reason the plot there developed ahead of time. Subsequently, he left the palace. Outside, a closed fan flew towards him. The hero caught it cleverly. It turned out that it was Gun who threw it. It was now that the girl found the time to show herself. Having the opportunity, the hero boasted that he had managed to make a spiritual breakthrough. Grinning, he invited Gun to go for a walk. Gun agreed, especially since she missed Vance even more. Following this, she jumped down towards the hero. The problem was that she couldn't officially go anywhere with Vance. The hero saw no problem in suggesting that they go separately. Already on this day, at night, events moved to the city center. Vance was walking briskly around the central square. At some point, Gun found him. At the sight of the hero, the girl literally beamed with happiness. It didn't last long, because Vance shoved some lollipops into her mouth. Gun was immediately outraged by such impudence. The hero laughed it off, because he thought that girls liked to suck on sweets. Afterwards, just in case, he made sure that no one was following Gun. After which, he hugged and pressed Gun to himself. Vance took plans for the rest of the evening into his own hands. So, I took Gun to a special dance establishment. Gun was genuinely captivated by the performance, and yet she felt Vance's predatory gaze on her. A second later, a servant appeared, presenting what the hero had previously ordered. It was some kind of gift that Vance presented to Gun. Opening the package, Gun found romantic brochures inside. The girl appreciated Vance's efforts to please herself. Afterwards, she asked the hero one difficult question. Vance was silent for a moment. Then, with words and actions, making it clear that Gun will always be with him. Quite beautifully making it clear that in his heart, there was only room for Gun. After which, Vance handed the girl a necklace. On his own, he began to try it on Gun's neck. Blushing and moaning, Gun made it clear that she liked the gift. The next moment, in response, Vance received a kiss. The players in the room were stunned. It was the first time they had seen someone kiss an NPC. After the performance, Vance walked with Gun through the streets. The girl admitted that she too would have to disappear for a while. There was nothing to be done, so the hero wished her luck. Suddenly, Gun took Vance's hand. She promised to reward Vance if her schemes were successful. The hero pretended that he didn't need anything like that. His behavior once again seemed very romantic to Gun. A little later, as she was leaving, she said goodbye to Vance. Finally, Vance once again wished him luck. At this point, they parted. As for Vance, he had to mind his own business. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a street vendor who was selling special pills. The hero listened and looked closely. They increased the pet's stats, so Vance decided to buy them all. Sometime later, with the help of pills, Vance managed to pump up the Iron Eater considerably. Later, the hero reached the portal to the dungeon. The players present immediately recognized Vance. Some envied Vance, while others considered him an upstart. But they all agreed that Vance would never get through this dungeon. In connection with this, the most enterprising of them opened the canvas. He offered to place bets on whether Vance would survive. One by one, the players willingly agreed to place bets. Soon, a whole bunch of spiritual stones lay on the canvas. Some people even threw a whole bag of stones onto the canvas. It was Sin who still burned for Vance. Her enormous bet, of course, shocked many. Vance knew nothing about this and had already moved inside the dungeon. This dungeon was truly special. After all, there was a plot here in the first place. And there was even some kind of life simulation. Suddenly, a carriage stopped in front of Vance. Inside her sat a passionate woman named Eri. The servants helped her get out of the carriage. After which, Eri handed over a certain letter, and it was intended for the village elder. Bowing to her, the elder asked Eri to follow him. The mere sight of her made the local men salivate profusely. Eri herself did not come to this place just like that. She couldn't get pregnant, and therefore wanted to buy a baby. The elder laughed, but was ready to help. Then, inviting Eri to go further into the house. He brought her to a special wing of the house where there were dozens of newborns. The elder allowed Eri to choose any of the babies. Nodding, the beauty promised to keep the elder's secret. Vance was secretly watching all this. He witnessed the elder suddenly hit Eri on the head with a club. Then, other villagers appeared on the threshold of the house. Licking their lips, they examined their prey. The men could hardly restrain themselves from starting to undress Eri right away. In any case, everyone was counting on a fair division of the spoils. Vance clearly didn't like what was happening. After thinking for a bit, the elder proposed his own option. But the accomplices didn't need money, they desperately desired women. In response, the elder sighed, wanting to know someone else's opinion. Laughing, the accomplices suggested using Eri in turn. The elder liked the idea, but he wanted to be first. The accomplices scratched their heads and agreed. When all the issues were settled, the elder sent the technicians out. He deliberately locked the doors tightly. Then, he turned contentedly towards his victim. Days have passed since Eri's capture. Those were later replaced by months. For long seasons, no one knew about Eri's fate. For everyone else, life continued to flow smoothly. But one day, Eri finally managed to give birth. A special ritual was performed, and the child's father was identified. The others didn't really like Dad. After all, it was often the one-eyed man who got the women. In any case, no one wanted to start a fight on this matter. As the rightful owner, the one-eyed man soon came for Eri. Without any tenderness, he roughly dragged Eri along with him. The one-eyed man promised her that he would definitely break the woman's will and make her docile. Eri was silent, her face frozen in despair. Vance continued to watch all this from the sidelines. For now, he could only sigh in disappointment. But in the middle of that night, screams were heard that did not belong to Eri at all. The other robbers hurried to the one-eyed man's house. Having broken down the door, they ran inside the house. There, they discovered blood-soaked floors and the mutilated body of a one-eyed man. However, Eri herself was nowhere nearby. Only after carefully examining everything was a trail found that led to the window. A chase began immediately. Eri herself was wandering somewhere in the middle of the swamps. Quite tired, her movements became extremely slow. Coming out of the water, she eventually collapsed, exhausted. It was just now that the robbers managed to discover her. Eri was captured as soon as possible. The robbers quickly began to decide what to do with the she-devil. For now, all the bandits agreed to drag Eri back to the settlement. But later, in order to avoid future problems, they decided to get rid of it. The elder drew his sword and was about to do what was necessary. For Eri, the execution was more of a release from suffering. When the poor fellow was killed, the robbers began to dig her grave. Some of them were sad that they were not able to fully enjoy the woman. But the hellish cold outside quickly took away their desire to chat idle. As usual, Vance watched all the terrible events. He winced vigorously, but didn't say a word. Time passed and the season changed again. Strange things were happening in the robbers' village, as people began to disappear from there frequently. There was a rumor among the locals about some vengeful force. Their conversation was interrupted when a rather tired man appeared. As quickly as possible, he took them to the house where the terrible thing happened. This time, the elder decided to inform the authorities. Along the way, he compared the current death and how the one-eyed man ended up. The story ended, and Vance finally woke up from his sleep. Knowing all the details of what happened, the hero began to dig a grave. Now Vance needed to find some evidence. He was sorting through the remains in the grave until his attention was drawn. There, in the middle of the bones, the ring still glittered. The ring was special. It helped Eri endure all hardships. With Vance's raising of the ring, an evil force was released into the world. Having materialized, it collapsed to the ground. Then the vile creature let out a piercing roar. This is exactly what Vance was waiting for. But it was not just a ghost, but a hybrid of the undead and a demon. Without much preamble, Vance gave battle to the monster. Just one swing of the sword and the creature lost most of its arms. And yet, the hero was saddened that Eri had suffered such a fate. Due to the wounds he had received, the half-demon hissed pitifully. Without fear, Vance walked closer to the monster. He tried to persuade the monster to let go of the past. All the offenders were long dead. However, the half-demon did not listen to his words. The hero did not give up trying to establish contact. For the last time, he asked the monster to calm its anger. Following this, Vance delivered a couple more blows with his sword. The hero did not stop, continuing to torture the monster. Unable to defend himself in any way, the half-demon raised his head. After which, he deliberately spewed acid out of himself. Vance was not affected by the acid because he used a shield. Under his protection, he continued his advance. Having grouped himself, he chose exactly where he would strike. Then he moved from the spot. Using his speed and pushing off the monster's body, he began to climb up. Very soon, he found himself in front of a toothy mouth. Next, he used spiritual undermining. The explosion he caused hit the monster. A well-planned operation managed to deprive the monster of half its health. But it was too early to rejoice, because the monster began to devour itself, thereby healing itself.